Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku became the Harbinger of true justice? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Are you still working on that case now? Naomasa looked up, eyes squinting at the sudden light that filled the small office he was holed up in. At the door, his long-term friend stood and stared at him with a judgmental and frankly hypocritical look on his face. Naomasa rubbed his eyes tiredly. If I could just figure out where all these demon drags are coming from, he muttered, shuffling some papers aside to make space for the steaming cup of coffee that was placed on his table. Thanks, I really needed a fresh one. The clock on the wall made an ambient tick-tock noise as the hands inched closer to 3 in the morning. Shota sighed deeply. I just got back from patrol. It was a quiet night, thank God. Shota said as he dropped down on the couch, which made an alarming groan that had Shota freezing for a second before relaxing in a practiced way that made the springs hug his back rather than stab him. The couch had seen better days, but Naomasa was reluctant to get rid of the first piece of furniture he'd dragged into this office the day he was promoted to detective. Outside, the rain pitter-pattered against the windows. Yes, Naomasa thought to himself, it's good it isn't too busy tonight. Any updates from your little analyst? Shota asked, blowing over his steaming cup and sipping it even though it was clearly too hot. Naomasa sighed, rubbing his eyes tiredly. They sent a report earlier, he admitted. That's why I can't sleep. It's all just so, we're missing something, Shota, and we both think it's something huge, way huger than just a couple murders and drag activity, but we need more proof. We need them to slip up. And your analyst dash. Argos, Naomasa said automatically. Shota squinted. Right, Argos, he said with pursed lips. How do you know he's trustworthy? Naomasa closed his eyes, leaning back in his chair and gathering his emotions. It wasn't Shota's fault for questioning Argos's loyalty, but Naomasa had already had to defend this analyst for what felt like months now despite having worked with him for years already. Shota, I've known this person for almost 5 years now, Naomasa said, every inch of his exhaustion clinging to his voice. I may not know their face or identity, but they've helped with so many cases, so many villain attacks that were prevented due to their intervention. The HPSE technically defines Argos as a vigilante and cautions us against using their help, but they give it so freely that it's impossible not to use their help. Don't you pay them? Shota asked dryly and Naomasa rolled his eyes. I do, but it isn't actually required. Argos has an account on the Hero Network that they take payment on, but usually for cases like these they don't ask for payments. Naomasa explained. They have a specific rate for analysis done on heroes and villains, and that analysis has saved so many lives. Argos sounds like a regular hero. Shota teased lightly. I wonder why they're so secretive. Naomasa had wondered the same thing many times over the years. In the beginning he hadn't trusted the new analyst, but one day he'd opened his email and there, sitting suspiciously in his inbox, was an email that closed a 5-month case that had been torturing him with its lack of information. That analysis had opened so many doors and new viewpoints on the case that Naomasa had ended up taking the lead on the case and solving it within 3 days of the email. After that email he'd begun a back and forth with the analyst who called themselves Argos, and to this day he still knew almost nothing about them other than that they were likely young, had at least 1 or 2 children, whether those children were siblings or their actual children Naomasa didn't know, and were usually up at odd hours of the night. He didn't even know what gender they were. Wouldn't I like to know? Naomasa sighed softly, picking up his mug and taking a deep swig from the coffee. I just wish I could thank them in person. You're a softie now, Shota said, already closing his eyes and settling down to nap. He grunted when Naomasa threw a pencil at him but didn't open his eyes. Perhaps he was going soft, but he'd frequently got the impression, especially when he thanked Argos after a hard case, that not a lot of people were kind to the mysterious analyst. There was always something slightly vulnerable in his written text of no problem, Successor, that struck Naomasa as very young. He hoped Argos wasn't too young. Hoped against all hope that the analyst was older, wizened, and perhaps even a bit hardened to the harshness of life. He hoped that Argos wasn't some kid who was too smart for their own good, or with some intelligence quirk they were using to solve cases. Staring at the bright new email that had just arrived in his inbox coming from Argos, he had a truly unsettling feeling that his hopes were for nothing. With a sigh, he picked up the pillow he was using to rest his head on and chucked it right at Shota's face, ignoring his loud curses and complaints. "Perk up, Sho, Argos just sent me another email about the case. It's the second one tonight, so something must have happened." Shota groaned loudly but sat up. There truly was no rest for good to triumph over evil, and Argos was living proof of that. As the hands on the clock ticked closer to 4, they stared at the screen in front of them, unmistakable dread pooling in their guts, and both felt intensely that things were about to get complicated. Midoriya Izuku stared deeply into the swirling, chaotic crimson of his childhood friend's eyes. "Do us all a favor, yeah?" Bakugo said cruelly, his brow furrowed, and for a single second Izuku remembered him as he had once been, small and fierce, protective as he defended Izuku to the ends of the earth. "Take a swan dive off a roof and hope for a quirk in your next life." The laughter of their peers echoed around them, but Izuku hardly cared for their chattering laughs. His eyes were only for Bakugo. "Were you cackin'? Where is my protector?" The blonde turned on his heel abruptly, and Izuku almost thought he'd heard the soft thought that echoed in his head, but no. Katsuki Bakugo had long ago deafened himself from hearing any of Izuku's heart, and today was no different. Izuku trudged, feet heavy and burdened with the day, and picked up his burnt and singed notebook from the koi pond outside their high school. "That's not food," he scolded lightly, fishing a piece of burnt paper out of the water so that the fish didn't try eating it. Fortunately, the contents were easily replicable, but it was still a loss for him. He paged idly through the encoded notes and sighed before stuffing it into his backpack to go through later. As much as he wanted to let his heavy shoulders drag him down to the floor, and sometimes, yes, off the edge of a building, Izuku could never bring himself to actually do it. He had too many people looking up to him. Too many people that were depending on him, that loved him, that wanted to see him live. Izuku had been to too many funerals. He had a funeral to attend that evening as well, and there was no conceivable way that he would demon his mother to attend a funeral for him and sit there accepting those grief-filled flowers as some paltry offering for his life. It was all people could do, and Izuku appreciated it and could see the beauty and sorrow in it, but he'd always loathed funeral flowers. He'd meant to walk home, but the long day was wearing on him, and he found himself treading off the beaten path. He took passages underground instead of in the more populated areas, and he appreciated the silence as he gave his face a rest from having to smile, from having to put up with everything all the time. He was sure that sometimes even all might surely had to stop smiling. "Lucky me." Izuku whipped to attention, flattening himself to the floor as some viscous green sludge swiped the air where he had been standing just seconds ago. "What the F dash? Where'd you go?" "Boy." The sludge seemed to have a voice, and Izuku found himself staring at a pair of poisonous green eyes that seemed to float impossibly within the sludge. "There you are, kid, hey come on," the sludge whined. "It'll just hurt for a minute, 45 seconds at most, and you'll be my hero." Izuku slipped his fingertips against the ridge of his butterfly knife that he kept tucked into his boot and let his leg kick right out and through the thick sludge. He judged that he would be kicking the legs out from a human if it weren't for the sludge's amorphous visage. As expected, his leg passed right through the sludge right to the other side where he dropped his backpack, but the action did seem to topple the sludge slightly before it reformed. "That's not very heroic of you, kid. Now really, I'm a little pressed for time." The sludge spoke, voice sounding stressed. Izuku flicked his knife out and gripped it in a tight fist. "Going somewhere, villain?" Izuku said coldly. He really wasn't in the best mood for an interaction with a villain that didn't even seem good enough to be ranked, and if he was, then surely it was at the end of the scale. "You've got a great pair of eyes there. I bet if I took them away you'd be forced to return to your real body, huh?" A quiver shook against those eyeballs as the villain seemed to realize he was at a disadvantage. Izuku kind of admired that he still made the attempt though. His knife jutted out, stabbing into the globulous body of the villain rather than attacking his eyes. It seemed to just sink through, but the villain did scream when he brought the knife right through his entire body. You're pissing me off now. The sludge screamed and Izuku wanted to retort something but he didn't get the chance as a car alarm went off somewhere in the distance and the split second of distraction was all the sludge needed before suddenly all Izuku could see was green. His breath cut off immediately and it felt like how he imagined drinking acid would feel. His senses were all burning thickly with the lack of oxygen and despite himself, panic filled his scrambling mind. He had to do something. Anything. There we go. Just a second more. Izuku had to fight. He had to bite down on the sludge sliding down his throat. He had to fight for his mother, for his kids, for his dreams, but his vision was going dark and his arms that had been so full of strength earlier were fast losing energy. He couldn't do anything. Texas, what the smas? All Might. Izuku definitely passed out for a minute there because he was sure he'd hallucinated All Might's voice. The force of the explosion that rocked the concrete he was standing on threw him backwards and he released a hoarse groan as his head smacked against the back of a car tire. The car immediately started crying with a safety alarm and honestly Izuku kind of wished he could cry along with it. Hey, wake up. Someone was smacking his face. Kid? Wake up. Izuku blinked his eyes open with some great difficulty. His chest was burning and he was sure he could still taste the strange bitterness of the sludge in his scratchy throat. His head was throbbing and he definitely sprained an ankle or something but none of that mattered to him as he took in his savior. All Might sent him his signature beaming smile. Hey, you're all right. He straightened up, towering over Izuku even as the hero pulled him to stand up. Sorry, I can't stay too long but don't worry. I signed your notebook. Izuku blinked. Was that greenish tinge around the corners of his eyes leftover sludge? He noted in a strangely apathetic way that yes, his burned and damp ink-coated notebook was open on the ground with All Might's signature right on the pages of his private analysis. The hero had 2 large soda bottles attached to his hips and Izuku could see the sludge villain trapped inside them, his eyes rolling around in agitation. All Might I dash. No need for thanks, young man. I'd best be off. All Might said, smacking his shoulder in a friendly manner before stepping back and preparing to leave. Izuku was going to regret this. He could feel it in his gut but he had to know. With a great leap and the last of his energy, he gripped All Might's leg firmly just as the hero took off in a spectacular jump that had them soaring up into the clear afternoon sky. The wind rustled through his hair and he idly thought that it was good he didn't have a flying quirk because this was not for him. Hey, let go. I love my fans but this is a bit much, kid. All Might shouted, shaking his leg and Izuku clung onto the hero's leg tighter. If I let go I'll die. He shouted right back and All Might seemed to consider that because he gripped Izuku by the back of his jacket and guided them to land on an empty rooftop. Izuku sprawled on the floor for a second. The combination of sludge in his lungs plus the brisk air from the flight was making it kind of hard to breathe. Now really I have to go. All Might sounded stressed and as he prepared to leave Izuku found his voice again. He sat, sprawled on the floor, looking pretty pathetic, and honestly he felt pathetic too, but he asked, voice trembling, do you think someone quirkless can become a hero? All Might froze. It was all the time he apparently had for Izuku because instantly the rooftop was filled with steam and Izuku stood up, utterly confused, flapping his hand through the air to clear his vision a bit. All Might? Where dash had he left? What was this steam? The area cleared slightly and Izuku paused his fluttering hand and gaped as the air thinned and revealed a man standing there in All Might's place. He wanted to deny it immediately. His lips moved to form a chaotic shout of denial and confusion but something held him back. Perhaps it was the look on the man's face. Maybe it was the gaping clothes he was wearing that seemed to fall off his thin, wraith-like body, or the familiar corn-yellow hair that had just moments before looked so bold and iconic, whereas now they hung flat against the man's sunken face. This man was All Might. The real All Might. Yeah, All Might sighed. It's me, kid. What happened to you? Izuku whispered, unable to help the concern bleeding out of his voice, his question forgotten in the moment. So, Izuku heard a story. A great and terrible story. He sat there on the cold floor, ignoring the shivers and aches in his body as he listened to All Might speak about a battle so awful that no one even knew about it, one that had taken more than just his health from him. All Might frowned deeply, staring at him with an almost sympathetic expression. You asked whether or not you can be a hero without a quirk? He reminded, and Izuku blinked, watching as the man stood up from his slouched seat on the floor, and Izuku mimicked him, feeling his legs tremble slightly. I'm sorry, but the answer is no. All Might said, and it felt like Izuku's chest was being ripped open. Like someone was reaching into the cavity and tugging on his heart until it felt like it would just pop right out. As you can see, I barely made it out even with a powerful quirk like mine. I'm afraid that in the field you would be more of a liability than a help, kid, he said, trying to make his voice gentle, but it didn't really matter because Izuku wasn't listening anymore. Being a policeman or a Dr. Dash? The answer is no. Really sorry, but I have to go. You'll keep this a secret, right, Dash? You can't be a hero. On the door and someone will let you down, Dash. And just like that, Izuku was alone on the rooftop. For a moment he just stood there in silence as he processed everything that had happened, and then he was laughing. He laughed and laughed and laughed until tears poured down his cheeks. Take a swan dive off the roof and hope for a quirk in your next life, Deku. Yeah, FNG maybe then. Toshinori flew away, but it felt somehow like he was falling through the air. Everything was right. The fires of One for All flickered through his veins, and he could hear the wind whispering against his ears, so why did it feel like he was free falling through the air? Do you think someone quirkless can become a hero? Damn it. That DMN kid. He was alone up in the air, so it was fine if his smile flickered away and his tears were lost in the moisture of the air and sky. Damn it. For just a second he'd seen himself standing there. Sure, the kid was smaller than he'd been at the same age, smaller and calmer, and there had been something almost unsettling in his eyes when he'd asked that question, but the desperation was the same. The way he'd held onto Toshinori so tightly. His trembling voice as he begged for an answer to his question. Damn it. You shattered his dreams, Toshinori. Someone has to do it. He shouted into the air. But did they really? He couldn't hold onto those embers anymore. It was dragging him down, and down there he had to be a hero. Up in the sky, in the brief moments where everything melted away, he was just Toshinori. He landed with a deep groan on the rooftop of the Mizudafu precinct. His body ached and trembled as he released his quirk to rest and recharge while he dealt with the sludge. He'd go back. He'd just deliver this sludge villain, and then he'd go back and find that kid. And what, Toshinori? He stood there on the roof for a moment, feeling utterly disconnected from the world. Regret was a piercing wound, and it twisted in his gut like fire and brimstone, and as if answering his dark thoughts, One for All flickered in his chest and seemed to tighten around his heart. What right do you have to say anything to him after saying he couldn't be a hero? Toshinori closed his eyes. He couldn't go back. Please, kid, don't listen to me. Go out and be a hero. You can do it, you can be it. Toshinori froze, his fingers tracing the empty handles on his pants where 2 thick soda bottles had been containing the sludge villain. What right did he have to preach to some kid when he himself was such a DMN failure? Damn it. He had to make this right. Somehow. The explosions reached Izuku's ears before the dark ground could entice him any further than it already had. He stood on the rooftop, his head tilted to the side. He knew those explosions as intimately as he knew the skin on his own palms. In a second his phone was in his hand, and he stood still and serious as he hacked into the surrounding cameras of the neighborhood they lived in. It didn't take him very long to find the source of the trouble. It would be kind of embarrassing if it did. Considering his job, Izuku's feet were moving before he could even comprehend the footage in front of his eyes as his fingers flew from camera to camera, angle to angle, trying to see what was being done. Katsuki Bakugo was there, right in front of the arcade Izuku knew he frequented after school with his friends, if you could call them that, and surrounding him was the familiar sludge that was still filtering Izuku's vision green. How had it escaped All Might? Was it when they were flying? Was he distracted because of Izuku? Was this his fault? For all his faults, Izuku could never bring himself to look away from Bakugo. They were all grown now, and there was so much between them, but a small, childish part of him that just wouldn't die. No matter how hard Bakugo tried to kill him, still clung to the memory of the blonde and desperately wished his friend would return to him. would be his brother again. His feet were carrying him without thought. He was practically flying in all the little hidey holes and alleys of Muzutafu to get to the scene of the chaos, and the second he broke into the light of the arcade, he tucked his phone away and took in the situation. There were several heroes on site and Izuku could already hear the whine of the ambulance on its way. In the middle, surrounded by that sludge villain, was Katsuki Bakugo. Can get close to him because of all the explosions. We have backdraft on duty but dash. Just wait for the right quirk to combat the Situ dash. It was like someone had stuck Izuku's head underwater. All the voices faded away and he stared at Bakugo's fighting body. His eyes were bloodshot, and whereas before, mere hours ago, they had been full of cruelty and spite, now there was only fear. Izuku hated that look on his face. Hey, stop. What are you doing, kid? He was running. He grabbed the first thing his hands could reach in his bag and it closed around his water bottle. Yeah, that would do the trick. He hurled the bottle right at the spot between the sludge's eyes, hitting it and forcing it to release Bakugo's mouth, letting him gulp in lungfuls of much-needed air. Deku, what the F are you doing here? Bakugo shouted, voice hoarse and damaged. Izuku could sympathize. I couldn't just let you die. Izuku said angrily, reaching out and taking his hand. Bakugo didn't even seem to realize it, but he gripped back so tightly Izuku was certain he was going to bruise, pulling him and desperately trying to get him out of the sludge's hold. Oh, it's you again. The sludge spoke and Bakugo's eyes widened, his eyes traveling over Izuku's body as if he were trying to see any hint of truth in the words spoken. What did I say about your demon eyes, villain? Izuku snarled. The villain blinked, releasing Bakugo ever so slightly. Now, Kaken, the eyes. His old friend didn't hesitate. He never had. The sludge villain released a spew of curses as Bakugo's explosions were concentrated right by his vulnerable eyes, causing him to release even more of Bakugo to freedom, and Izuku gripped his arms tightly, pulling as hard as he could. All right, kids, I've got it from here. Izuku flinched, staring up at All Might with some strange, swirling emotion somewhere between guilt, horror, and dissatisfaction. All Might tugged them gently but firmly aside, easily ripping Bakugo from the last constraints, and the moment they were free they were pulled aside by other heroes on site. Izuku watched, his jaw hanging slightly open, as All Might literally changed the weather with the force of his power. In that regard, no, Izuku could never be a hero like All Might. He knew that better than anyone, however. What you were thinking running in there like that? We had it under control and you dash. Kamui Woods was talking, but all Izuku was hearing was excuses. That green tinge was slowly becoming red as Izuku's anger grew. He could plainly see that Bakugo was already being treated at the ambulance station, and there was a huge crowd of people filming, along with news crews and sidekicks crawling over the space. Why was he the only one getting scolded? What were you doing? He blurted, interrupting the impassioned hero's spiel. Kamui Woods snapped his jaw shut, looking astounded. We were handling it. He shouted, and Izuku's eyes narrowed. He couldn't breathe. Izuku said passionately, standing tall and proud but not screaming, refusing to stand there and yell like a child, like Kamui Woods, who had barely started to make a hero name for himself yet had so much audacity. You were standing there doing nothing while he was fighting for his life. You were standing there waiting for the right quirk to come along and save the day. But tell me, Kamui Woods, what quirk did I use? But you didn't save him, it was All Might who saved the day. Some sidekick piped in, looking incensed, and Izuku made a mental note of their uniform, intent on finding out who they were so he could add all of their names to his blacklist. At least I tried. He said coolly. It's more than you can say for yourself, and you call yourselves heroes. Bravo for you. He clapped sarcastically and turned on his heel to grab his fallen backpack. He let the water bottle go since he didn't care about it and just wanted to get the hell out of there and away from their judgmental eyes. Again, he took quieter paths as he made his way home. He really didn't need anyone coming after him to continue the fight or to run into Bakugo or anyone who wanted more from him today. He just wanted to go home. He wanted his mother to hold him, and he wanted to go to the kids and read them silly stories and forget about the awful day. He wanted to go and pay his respects to his fallen friends tonight and kiss their foreheads, and then he wanted to find sleep. Young man. Izuku skittered around as he grabbed his butterfly knife to defend himself, realizing that it wasn't there anymore and feeling a surge of panic. He calmed down only slightly to realize it was All Might in his smaller form. The man was beaming at him widely, his floppy hair covering his eyes. He looked just as emaciated as he had before, but this time there was a strange energy around him. It looked like anticipation or excitement. All Might. He murmured in greeting. He couldn't help but cringe inwardly. What trouble was he in now? You are not an easy man to find, All Might announced. When I got to the precinct to deliver the villain, I realized I'd lost him along the way, so I got distracted trying to find him again, but I was on my way back to you. Izuku lifted his brow. What? You were trying to come back for me? He questioned softly. Why? All Might flashed those brilliant pearly whites again. I was wrong, he declared. I was really, really wrong, young man. I owe you an apology and I hope you accept it. You can be a hero. Anyone can be a hero with enough hard work and passion. I forgot that for a moment when looking at you, because for a moment you reminded me of myself and I was scared. He looked a little embarrassed now, his smile fading somewhat as a more solemn air surrounded them. He sighed. I reminded you of yourself? But you're so powerful, and I'm just, a quirkless nobody really. Izuku said, and he didn't even mean to be self-deprecating. Those were just the facts, but All Might was already shaking his head, looking deeply upset. I didn't always used to be this way, young man, he said seriously. I was once powerless just like you, and I had a dream to save people just like you. You asked me that question and I remembered how I used to be and how much I've failed, how damaged I am now. I'm sorry, he said. Sincerely. I shouldn't have projected my failures onto you. You can be an amazing hero. Tears spread down Izuku's cheeks and he was helpless to stop them. He blinked a few times, but that just made it worse, and he reached up to clutch at his chest where it felt like all that sludge and slime was rising and trying to choke him. That means a lot to me, All Might. He managed to choke the words out, but his overwhelm was a little much, and All Might gave an awkward chuckle, looking a little amused at the sheer amount of tears. When he managed to calm down slightly, All Might reached out and held his shoulders, squeezing gently. Can I ask your name? He asked, and Izuku laughed wetly, giving it freely, and his hero smiled. You're powerless now, Midoriya, and while you could make a truly amazing quirkless hero, you've put me in a position where I want to give you the means to become a hero unlike the world has ever seen. All Might said earnestly. Izuku blinked. Pardon? I want to give you my quirk. Pardon? Once Izuku stopped choking on his own spit, All Might explained more. My quirk is called One for All, he said in a voice that made Izuku feel like this moment was going to change his life forever. It was passed down from hero to hero, each of us determined to find a successor to carry the torch of herodom. My own predecessor passed it to me and told me to find someone that made me believe in what it means to be a hero, and you, Midoriya, make me believe in heroes again. Izuku gaped. Not joking, he deduced, and All Might chuckled and shook his head. All Might, hey, you don't know me. You don't know what kind of person I am, or what I'm capable of. Why would you offer this to me? Because of how you saved that boy. All Might said eagerly, bouncing on the ball of his feet. I watched you from the crowd. No one else was doing anything, but you were watching and analyzing the situation, and you moved even though you weren't sure if you were going to be able to do anything helpful. That's what it means to be a hero, Midoriya, doing something. Anything you can possibly do to help someone, to save them. Izuku had no words. A part of him wanted to latch onto the ridiculous notion that there were quirks that could be passed on, but another, much larger, part of him was cautious and hurt. I can't just accept this, All Might. For someone who was usually so much larger, it was quite something to see All Might wilt even more than his now small frame, and Izuku hastily blurted, I'm not saying no. There's so much I was supposed to be a quirkless hero, All Might, he said seriously, his brow furrowed. That was the dream I contented myself with, and there's a whole community of quirkless people who I wanted to protect and show them that it's possible. If I accepted your quirk, wouldn't I just be saying it's not possible after all? Somehow All Might didn't suit such a serious face, but Izuku didn't interrupt his thoughts as he seemed to be gathering himself and trying to formulate an answer to the question. I think, the hero said carefully, that there's no appropriate answer to that, Midoriya. You very well could become an amazing Quirkless hero, but I cannot lie to you and tell you that it's going to be easy to get yourself to a position where you can speak about these issues and be heard. To my shame, I didn't focus specifically on advocating for the Quirkless communities. I know how hard it must be to live in a world where you don't have a quirk, something that makes you special, but I'm sorry, Izuku interrupted. Special? All Might fell silent. Special? He repeated coldly. All Might, do you have any idea what it's like to be quirkless? Do you even know what I'm fighting to protect so hard? I'm afraid I don't, young Midoriya, All Might admitted shamefully. Izuku straightened up. I can't accept your quirk, All Might, not until you understand what accepting it really means. Izuku said strongly. Are you free for the rest of the evening? All Might looked a little wary, but he nodded. I can no longer do hero work today, he admitted. My work time has long ago ended and I don't have the stamina to work further today. I'm going to take you to my home, All Might, but the people there, although they admire you and look up to you, they won't take kindly to you showing up out of the blue like this. Do you have something else I can call you? Izuku asked, leading the way to his home. It wasn't far away at all, the walk wouldn't take them 5 minutes at this point. Oh, my name is Tashinori Yagi. All Might said awkwardly. You can call me Yagi, I guess. It's an honor to meet you, Asen, I really do mean that. Izuku said quietly. I'm sorry I can't just accept your offer easily. I'm sorry that I have to introduce you to such a macabre reality, but if you're serious about this then you need to understand the kind of people I want to save. I understand, young man, Yagi said softly. You don't need to apologize. I actually admire that you're this serious about it and didn't just accept it. It shows a strong mind and makes me all the more determined to have you as my successor. Izuku blushed despite himself. My family we're big. Izuku explained as they drew closer to his home. I call them my family, but it's not really like that. We're a community and we keep each other safe and protected, and it's not just here in Mizudafu. I usually spend holidays traveling to Chiba and Yamanashi where we have homes too. You have family all the way over there? Yagi asked curiously. We're not related, but we're all some of us have. Izuku said simply. They'd arrived and at the large doors to the building, he paused and knocked on the door in a simple pattern that signified that he was there. The door opened and Cherry beamed at him. Aizawa. Cherry squealed. You're home, we saw you on the news and we were so worried. Auntie Inko is going spare up in the hospital wing. Izuku winced. Oh, I was hoping she'd be too busy to watch the news. He groaned and Cherry giggled before it cut off as she noticed Yagi standing there awkwardly. Izuku moved them all to stand in the foyer instead of hanging in front of the open door. He closed the door securely behind them. Who is this Aizawa? She asked distrustfully, hiding behind him. He rubbed her cherry red hair gently and knelt down so that they were eye level. This is Yagi-sama, he's a new friend of mine. Aren't you gonna say hi to him? Cherry blushed. Hi Yagi-sama. I'm Cherry Fujino. Cherry introduced herself, bowing respectfully, and Yagi smiled at her softly, returning the bow. It's my pleasure to meet you, Cherry-san. Yagi returned and Cherry giggled shyly at being addressed so formally. She peeked up at Izuku. Everyone's getting ready for the service tonight, Aizawa. I'm posse to be helping Haruna-san with the food, but after we saw the news I was sent here to wait for you. She told him, her tone utterly matter-of-fact. Really? Well, could you go let them know I'm back and we can start soon? Izuku sent her away gently. I have to speak with Yagi-san and show him around a little. Okay. Cherry saluted them and ran off to join her friends in the kitchen. When they were alone, Izuku turned to Yagi and shyly supplied the secret hero with warm house slippers before leading him up and through the building. This place is called Hydrangeanger. Izuku said abruptly, when the silence between them was growing too loud. Yagi looked at him sideways. It's, a safe house for the quirkless or the low-quirked or villainous quirked people who society doesn't want to see. This is the first Hydrangeanger building, but we have one in Chiba and one in Yamanashi, like I said, he explained, leading Yagi upstairs. I originally started this, so I'm kind of the founder. You're the founder of a safe house for quirkless individuals? Yagi asked, surprised and looking quite touched. Izuku pinkened a bit and nodded. I know firsthand what it was like to be quirkless, and after meeting others like me, others who lived those same realities, I couldn't turn my back on them. Izuku said simply. Yagi-san, do you know that as of 25 years ago, modern hospitals are allowed to refuse treatment to all quirkless people? Yagi blinked. Truly? He breathed. But why? Izuku smiled wryly. It was kind of amusing, in a morbid way, to see a hero like All Might so surprised at hearing quirkless truths and statistics. They passed one of the living area spaces and Izuku picked Tofu up from the floor. She was an aging cat that struggled to walk sometimes, and he vaguely noticed her limping a bit, so he usually picked her up to hitch a ride whenever he saw her. There's a palatable answer to that question, but the honest answer is that no one cares if we live or die. Izuku said calmly, then gestured to a row of cheerful painted doors. These are the kids' rooms, by the way. We have a few more empty rooms, but we're filling up fast since there are more people coming from other prefectures. Yagi looked around himself, seeming almost like a lost puppy with his confusion. Izuku scratched Tofu's head gently and passed her off onto one of the many cat stands they kept inside the building. I didn't know that it had gotten bad enough to require a safe house. Yagi said in a soft voice. You must have had a hard time growing up. You could say that, Izuku said evenly. I'm one of the lucky ones, though. My mother is an amazing woman who supported me even through the hardest of times and her own struggles too. Not a lot of us are lucky like that. What service are they preparing for? Yagi asked as they watched from the doorway as people moved around with a solemn air around them. Izuku sighed deeply. A funeral service, Yagi-san. Izuku said simply. Yagi didn't look surprised, but he did look saddened and understanding. Come, I'll take you to get some flowers and find someone to explain the proceedings to you. We can talk about, that afterwards. Yagi nodded, looking determined. Izuku didn't ask what he just thought to fuel that determined glint in his eye. In the Hydrangeanger vegetable gardens, they grew all sorts of produce which the older members of the house sold at morning markets. The flowers were always good sellers, and they mostly used those funds for the household, such as food and electricity, while Izuku took care of things like the kids' school fees and building maintenance, as well as non-returnable loans to community members who were aging out of school and needed to find work. Izuku explained all of this to Yagi, glossing somewhat over how he was able to afford this, as they gathered a few wreaths of flowers that had been prepared on a table. Miko was there as well, sorting through some flowers, and he looked up and smiled at Izuku warmly. Hey Aizu-chan, who's your friend? He asked casually. Izuku was familiar enough with the body language of all those he lived with to see that Miko was cautious and on edge around someone new, much like most quirkless people were whenever they were faced with someone new who could potentially be a quirkist or some crazy cult person who wanted to kiss their feet. Miko, this is Yagi-san. He's new to Hydrangeanger, not a member but just a guest for now. Izuku introduced. Yagi-san, this is Miko. He's a great florist, and he's definitely to thank for these great bouquets we have tonight. They are some truly beautiful flowers. Yagi offered earnestly, and Miko blushed, thanking them and scampering away. He's only 15, Izuku explained. He has a quirk that makes dead flowers bloom. His parents are in the hero support industry and have pretty powerful quirks. They were disappointed that Miko had such a weak quirk, and they disowned him. Disowned him? Yagi exclaimed, looking horrified. But that's Dash. Izuku nodded. I understand that it's a lot to wrap your head around, Yagi-san. But this is the world we live in, and it's my job to take care of these people as best I can. He paused in the hallway in front of the hospital wing. I found Miko wandering the streets 3 years ago and brought him here after he collapsed from hunger. He has a quirk, Yagi-san, an amazing quirk. It's just not good enough for the world. Izuku pointed out another of his friends. She was busy helping a bunch of the kids unwind rows of fairy lights to decorate the rooftop with and didn't even seem to notice they were standing there watching her. That's not Suki, she's Quirkless. She's my age and she's been here since she was 8 years old. Izuku spoke about his oldest friend in the community. Her parents abused her after her diagnosis and she ran away. She tried getting help at police stations but they all turned her away or took her to orphanages where she was accepted only to be kicked out since no one would adopt her anyway. Yagi was growing steadily paler by the second and Izuku felt bad that he had to say these things to him. He made sure to make his voice gentler. Do you understand yet, Yagi-san? He asked softly. It's not about being special for us. We just wanted to exist but people, they don't want us. Nobody wants us. Yagi seemed too overcome to speak and Izuku let him have his silence, leading him into the hospital wing. His mother was there, sifting through their supplies and making some notes while she hummed a lullaby she used to sing for Izuku when he was young. Immediately something in his chest loosened and he felt more relaxed than he had the entire day. Mom, I'm home, Izuku greeted. Inko turned around, startled. Oh, Izuku dear, you're here? I saw the news. Did you get checked out on site? Are you okay? She worried, coming over and fussing over him. She turned his head this way and that and before he knew it there was a flashlight shining in his eyes and she'd scared. After the service we're coming down here and you're going to have a checkup, she insisted. I just let Hibiki-san and Yuka-chan go for the service but they'll have to come right back afterwards. How are they? Izuku worried. Is Hibiki-san gonna be okay with his ribs all messed up like that? Inko sighed deeply. Hibiki Mori, one of their community, had been involved in a hate crime that Izuku was still trying to get resolved with the local police department. Stepping in as Argos was unfortunately too telling and he couldn't risk letting his personal life become involved with his job. Kazuki promised to keep him under control. He had to be at the service though, you know how close he was to Sayuri-chan. Inko said softly and Izuku nodded solemnly. Mom, this is Yagi-san by the way. He's a guest of mine tonight. Izuku introduced and Inko blinked, giving Yagi a once-over. She looked concerned. It's a pleasure to meet you, San. Are you alright? She asked and Yagi laughed awkwardly. I'm alright, I'm a little sickly but I have a good doctor keeping me alive. He promised and Inko gave him a small smile. I'm lucky to have met your son today, Midoriya-san. He's been showing me around and explaining the world, I suppose. It's a sad one, isn't it? Inko sympathized and Yagi gave an almost tearful nod. I'm going to have to leave you here for a while, Yagi-san, Izuku apologized. I have to get ready for the service and most of the guests are probably already on the rooftop. My mom will take care of you and show you the ropes, and we can meet and talk afterwards, alright. That's fine, Inko said cheerfully. Go on and do what you need to do, Izuku, I've got your friend. Izuku smiled, hugging his mother tightly and nodding to Yagi. He hurried to his room and raced himself through a shower that didn't take him a full 5 minutes, just so he could get the absolute worst of the day off of him. He got dressed in a pair of slacks and a dark gray button-up shirt. Around his arm he fastened a simple black mourning band and he took a minute to comb his wild hair but didn't put too much effort into taming the dark green curls. Izuku almost never took off the dark band on his left arm. As the founder of Hydrangeanger, he felt close to the people in the community and when they lost someone it hit him extremely hard. It had only been a day since he'd removed the black armband, 30 days after the last funeral they'd had for a young girl they'd lost in Yamanashi. This was Izuku's life. It was for these people that he wanted to be a hero. He couldn't deny the allure of Yagi's offer, but he needed Yagi to understand that whatever vision he had of Izuku, whatever preconceived notion he had that Izuku would somehow live up to, it just wasn't going to happen. Izuku had carved the kind of hero he was going to be into his very soul and for nothing would he give that goal up. He was going to save people. That was always going to be his goal. So, how do you know Izuku? Midoriya Inko asked pleasantly as they made their way to the rooftop. Tashinori fought the urge to gulp. There was something dangerous in the sway of this woman's hips, and her utterly polite exterior that concealed a fierce protector within. Tashinori could see it glittering in her eyes and he thought, vaguely, that it was a good thing this woman wasn't a villain or he'd have a hard time not fearing her. "We met today," Toshinori said honestly. "I'm a pro-hero. Actually, I saved him from that sludge villain and it was due to my negligence that the villain escaped and managed to attack others." Inko hummed, looking curious. "A pro, huh?" It was almost like she was talking to herself. "Why did Izuku bring you here?" "I offered him something. Training. To be a hero," Toshinori said, skirting the truth a bit. "I believe I offended him while offering that, but fortunately your son is a very forgiving young man and he offered me an opportunity to understand him better before we agreed on anything. I couldn't dare pass up the gift he was giving me to truly know him." Inko looked surprised. "Interesting," she murmured. "Very well, Yagi-sen, let's go up. Everyone is waiting for Izuku to start the service, but I'll explain some things to you once we're inside." The rooftop was quite large. It made sense, it was a large building, but Toshinori was still somewhat surprised by the amount of people there. Not quite as surprised as he had been to note the sheer amount of cats this building hosted as well. As a matter of fact, the cats were all over the rooftop too, lounging against people or playing in the center of the floor with a variety of toys. No one seemed at all perturbed by them, and even Midoriya hadn't blinked or mentioned the cats, so Toshinori assumed the cats were just a thing there. Along the pillars and poles there were fairy lights strung all around, and in the very center, at the right side of the rooftop, there was an altar set up, draped in fine silks, and a large portrait of a woman. Beside the portrait sat an urn that was decorated and engraved and sitting on an equally decorated wooden stand. Toshinori took in the sight of all the people mourning, dark black bands around their arms, and the band that Inko had wrapped around his arm felt painful suddenly, as if it didn't belong there. What right had he to grieve this woman who he didn't even know? Her name was Saito Sayuri, Inko told him softly. He latched onto her voice, unable to handle the harsh, bitter cries that echoed the rooftop. She was 20 years old. She'd been here for quite a few years now, almost 7 years if my memory is correct. Toshinori wondered just how old Midoriya had been when he founded this place. She was well beloved here even though her life wasn't easy by any means. Sayuri always struggled with her quirklessness, and though she tried her very best to keep moving forward, it was too much for her and she had to go, I suppose. Toshinori understood what she meant immediately. "This is our life, Yagi-sen," Inko said, and Toshinori could see that same glittering passion that had drawn him to her son shining in her eyes. "We've had 7 funerals this year, and that's just in Mizudafu. Izuku only just took off his mourning band a day ago for a funeral he attended in Yamanashi." "They're all suicides?" Toshinori asked, a pit of darkness in his stomach, and Inko shook her head sadly. "Not always, but most of the time," she said factually. "Some are accidents, some are hate crimes. Mostly they're suicides. These kids are baited into it at schools, in the streets, in their neighborhoods. They're given nothing and expected to be happy with it, but they can't, and it's devastating each time, but you can't be upset at them for leaving when staying is so hard." "Do you?" Toshinori didn't even want to ask the question, but Inko looked at him openly, waiting, and he pushed down his fear and discomfort and asked, "Do you fear losing Izuku to this fate?" Her face crumpled slightly and he wished he could isekai the words back in. She straightened up and offered him a tight smile. "Every day of my life." No other words passed between them as music began to play and the lights drifted slightly in the wind. And then Izuku was there. Midoriya Izuku. He was such an interesting boy. Toshinori had never in all his years met someone that he wanted to pass his quirk to. He'd come to Japan to start the search with Sasaki's recommendation, but he knew in his soul that he didn't even need to meet whoever Sasaki had because it wouldn't be him. There was something indescribably heroic in the slant of Midoriya's shoulders as he walked right up to the photograph of the forever young Sayuri and bowed several times right on the ground. Like all other mourners, he wore dark clothes, and Toshinori felt somewhat out of place in his lighter-colored clothing, though no one spared him a second glance in light of their own grief. Midoriya stood, placing his flowers beside the photograph and proceeding to light a thick stick of incense which he placed before her photograph. Finally he faced the crowd and Toshinori's heart lurched to see tears spreading down his cheeks. He'd previously thought that Midoriya wasn't that affected even though it was a funeral. He'd seemed completely at ease, even toned and tempered as he showed Toshinori around, but now he could see that it was all a facade that was hiding a boy that hurt and felt so much. Beside him, Inko was sobbing. Midoriya seemed to be gathering himself and his emotions. He reached up to dry his cheeks and no one dared to rush him. I keep thinking that one day I'll be able to come to one of these services and not cry. Midoriya said after a moment. I don't want to cry when I remember my loved ones that are watching over us now. I don't want to have this moment be full of sorrow and tears of grief and pain. Midoriya said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word. Before I remember that Sayuri left us, I want to remember how good she was while she was here. I want to remember her light and the way she loved. Sayuri is gone, yes, but she spent so long loving all of us so tenderly that she gave us all a piece of her heart, and that heart lives on with us now. Midoriya said strongly, tears spreading down his cheeks and making his voice tremble. It feels like a goodbye, but I promise you that it is not, Midoriya said, and he stared at a group of children who were openly bawling, holding onto each other and onto their friends. It's simply a see you later. Life is so hard to live. It would be harder still to go through it and carry only the grief of a goodbye in our hearts, so please don't say goodbye to Sayuri. He looked out at them all. Say, see you later, Sayuri-chan. Midoriya smiled thickly through his tears. Say, this life was hard for you, friend, but we don't begrudge you needing to go away for a while. We're keeping you alive in our hearts where it's safe and sound, so rest easy, Sayuri. Rest easy, Sayuri. The crowd cried, and though Toshinori didn't join in on the shout, he could feel tears slipping down his cheeks and he couldn't fathom it. He was crying. Really, truly crying. All of a sudden that black band around his arm didn't feel so heavy anymore. He genuinely mourned for this girl and the one in Yamanashi, and all the others that were mourned that no one even knew about. No one cared about them. No one except for Midoriya. Izuku stood there, smiling through the tears. He was smiling for the soul of a girl lost in the stars. He was smiling, and Toshinori could swear that he was as glittering and captivating as a star himself. A true hero. The service came to an end about an hour later after they sat in a circle and told stories of Sayuri's life. Izuku had pitched in where it was necessary and had told his own story of meeting Sayuri for the first time when she was just 13 and he was 10. He was exhausted after the day he'd had, but he didn't let any of that show on his face while he talked with his friends, with the kids, the people who were all grieving another lost star. Izuku was grieving for her too. Each loss felt like another failure to him. Logically, he knew he couldn't save everyone, and he knew that just being a small-time hero who saved one or two people wasn't going to change anyone's life. He looked up, finding his eyes wandering over to where Yagi was sitting beside his mother. They'd served a meal already, just a home-cooked meal that Sayuri had enjoyed the most, and Yagi had a plate in his lap and was chatting warmly with a few of the kids while his mom watched and pitched in every now and then. It was hard to reconcile the emaciated man there with the All Might, and yet somehow it was true. Somehow it was a reality that All Might had stood there in front of him and offered him his quirk. No, that wasn't exactly it. He'd offered to make Izuku his successor. To give Izuku the opportunity to be great, to be an advocate for his community even if he no longer belonged to it wholly by now having a quirk. They'd have to come up with a pretty spectacular lie, and Izuku knew there was going to have to be some extreme paperwork to go through. He'd have to lie to these people around him. He'd have to sit there and tell them something about how he suddenly had a powerful quirk, one that would take him to hero school, possibly even UA. Do I deserve it? Yagi suddenly looked up, meeting his eyes, and Izuku couldn't help but flush at being caught staring at the man. Yagi smiled widely, and even like this, small and too thin, his wide smile was so completely All Might that it was a wonder no one else noticed the resemblance. It isn't about whether or not you think you deserve it, Izuku. We don't get to decide who is born with or without quirks, and if he has decided that I'm worthy of his quirk, who am I to question it? So, Izuku decided that if All Might hadn't changed his mind, he would accept this quirk, this honor and platform, and he'd do his DMN best to make sure the world knew where he came from. Yagi seemed to see something in his eyes because he beamed and said something softly to Inko before standing up and walking over. Izuku stood up to meet him halfway. Let me show you to the kitchen, Yagi-sen, perhaps we can have some tea and talk for a bit. Izuku offered and Yagi gave a beaming nod, clapping an almost proud hand on Izuku's shoulder as they made their way down from the roof. The building was mostly empty since everyone was either on the rooftop or in their rooms mourning in their own ways. When they passed one or two people, Izuku greeted them warmly, but for the most part, since they could see he had a guest, they didn't approach. The kitchen was empty and Izuku gestured for Yagi to take a seat while he made a tray of tea for them to enjoy. It was simple enough to prepare the hojicha, his choice for the evening since it was low in caffeine, though he did find himself reaching towards the back where they kept the better cups. Your speech, Yagi broke the silence between them when Izuku placed the tray in front of them. It was very moving. I have lost many good friends in my life and struggled to say goodbye to them. It was a true comfort to think of seeing them again one day. Oh, a small part of Izuku had expected the hero to immediately rescind his offer. Now faced with him actually finding beauty in the funeral Izuku presided over was a bit startling. Thank you. I'm glad I could help you to see your grief in a new way. I have a lot of practice with it, so I've been trying to get the people here, especially the kids, to be able to meet it often without growing too despondent. You are a remarkable young man, Midoriya. I believe I owe you an apology, Yagi said seriously. I did not mean to imply that you simply wished for a quirk to be special. Well, nevertheless, what I meant is irrelevant to how I feel now. Izuku held his breath as Yagi put his cup down and placed his palms on his knees, looking almost sicker with how nervous he seemed. Please, Midoriya Izuku, please accept the role as my successor, he said, placing his palms together in a prayer that he lifted to his forehead, staring at Izuku desperately. I would not dare to mold you, Midoriya. I wouldn't do you who is already a hero to so many a disservice by trying to make you into a symbol of peace as I have been. That's not what the world needs anymore, and you made me see that. I did. Izuku blurted breathlessly and Yagi nodded eagerly. You did, he pressed. Up there on the roof. Those people that you've been taking care of for so long, they do not need things to remain peaceful, to stay as things have stayed. They need a hero that inspires. A hero who is unafraid to stand and say that things are bad now but with a little hope they can be better. Hope. Izuku whispered. His chest ached. Yes, he had hope. Hope was almost all that kept him standing most days, even when everything in the world wanted to crush him down to the cement floor and even beyond that sometimes. Yagi looked so hopeful himself. His eyes were gleaming with it and Izuku couldn't help but lean forward and take his weary hands in his. Yagi-san, it was Yagi's turn to hold his breath. I accept. Yagi beamed brighter than the sun. Naomasa sat at his desk glaring at his laptop fiercely. There had been another murder in Saitama. After a week of chaos-filled days that the HSPC were forcing the police to cover up, another body had turned up near Omiyaku that fit the MO of their suspected serial killer. Naomasa had sent the case documents to Argos the second he got them and had received a simple and empathetic, well sheet, in reply and then nothing since then, which had been about an hour ago. Now. Naomasa looked up, startled out of his stress-soaked thoughts. It had been ages since he last heard that voice in person. Tashinori? What the hell are you doing here? Naomasa stood and embraced his old friend. The years had not been kind to his friend and he inwardly marveled at the work of the doctors when he looked at Tashinori's healed body. I had to come by to let you know, I just couldn't keep it to myself. Tashinori was practically bouncing in place with excitement. I found a successor. Naomasa blinked. For some reason, he felt a shiver run down his spine on behalf of whomever had the fate of stepping into the symbol of peace's shoes. A successor? Are they a student? Naomasa questioned, leading him to sit down. How did you meet them? When did you arrive? Tashinori chuckled. Whoa, slow down there. He laughed. I actually arrived just this morning, and I met him this afternoon. I've just come from his home where he agreed to be my successor. You just met this boy today? He blurted, stunned as the words all registered as true. Tashinori, how can you be sure? I'm certain. Tashinori said, and Naomasa shuddered slightly as he felt his quirk flare at the statement. Well, who is he then? Naomasa was already preparing to do a background check. Who charmed All Might so much that he just had to give over his quirk? Toshinori chuckled awkwardly, scratching his neck, and Naomasa felt a certifiable headache coming his way at the look in his friend's eyes. Well, he's quirkless like I was. Toshinori admitted. His name is Midoriya Izuku, he's 17 years old and now he's incredible, honestly. Naomasa frowned. Midoriya, why was that name familiar? He sounds amazing. Naomasa said truthfully. That name was familiar, but he couldn't quite place it, so he resolved to do more research once Toshinori left. They spoke for a while, catching up, but Naomasa had to send him away when his phone made a noise that was personalized to Argos's number. He whipped his phone open the second Toshinori was gone. It's getting closer to Mizudafu, Tsuka-san. By my calculations, the next round should be in Tokyo. They're targeting big and small cities, making it hard to pin them down, but Tokyo is a hotspot for drags and villain activity. It would be foolish not to sell there. Kanagawa needs to have more hero and police support too. If they make it to Tokyo, then Kanagawa is right next to it. Tsukachi. It's possible that they'll go to Yamanashi next, and if they follow that trajectory, then they'll be in Mizudafu in no time. Despite my name, I'm not an all-seeing eye. I can't always find people in other prefectures, but if they step foot into Mizudafu, it will be their first mistake. Naomasa shuddered slightly. He could feel the threatening energy practically emanating from his phone. There was a slight thump outside his door, and he didn't even flinch as the door swung open to reveal Shota in all his Eraserhead glory. "You're lucky Sansa was still here to deal with the scum I just brought in," he said, by means of greeting, and Naomasa rolled his eyes. "Lucky me," he said dryly. "They lack a definitive pattern for the most part, but I have eyes in Yamanashi and Chiba that let me know about any drag-related crimes. They'll notice if there's an uptick of tea in the city, and I'll attempt to track the trajectory. Tsukachi, I'm pretty sure I don't want to know what eyes mean." "Tsuka-san, you know everything I do is perfectly legal, winky face." Naomasa snorted despite himself, and Shota turned and lifted a brow at him from the coffee station set up in the corner of his office. "Argos," he explained. "It's rare that they tease me, so it's kind of funny whenever they do." He turned the phone so that Shota could read over his shoulder. The hero gave a soft chuckle and slouched against the chair. "Here I thought we were the only night owls. What are they doing up at 2 in the morning?" Shota mumbled tiredly. "That's my fault, I sent them new case files." Naomasa sighed. "There was another murder in Saitama, and we think they're gearing up to arrive in Mizudafu soon. We're hoping to catch them." Tsukachi. "As legal as a cup of tea at 2 in the morning, I'm sure." Tsukachi. "What I don't know won't kill me." "Tsuka-san, this is why I like you the most out of all the detectives I deal with." Naomasa couldn't help but feel a bit flattered even as Shota snorted at the message and nudged his shoulder teasingly. "Wow, Tsuka-san, careful there, or I might have to tell your wife that you're sweet on your illegal vigilante analyst." "It's not like that," Naomasa rolled his eyes. "I told you, I've been working with Argos for 5 years now. I suppose I'm kind of fond of them. I wish they'd trust me a bit more with their identity." "Now you're such a softie. No wonder Riku-san loves you so much." Shota teased, letting his head fall on Naomasa's shoulder as they both laughed. After a while of back and forth with Argos, he suddenly had an epiphany. "Tsukachi, do you do analysis on private citizens, by the way?" "How private are we talking?" "And no, not usually, but it is you asking, so I could possibly be persuaded." Again, Naomasa fought the flush that threatened to rise on his cheeks, ignoring Shota's snickering as the hero read over his shoulder. "Tsukachi, I'm looking for information on a kid. I only know their name, but they're not a suspect or anything. A friend just told me about them, and I want to make sure they're a good sort." "Color me intrigued. What's the name?" "Tsukachi. Midoriya Izuku." It took a long time for Argos to reply back. Naomasa frowned at his phone and even started pacing while Shota just watched amusedly. Maybe they fell asleep? He offered helpfully, and Naomasa shook his head. "Argos isn't like that. They're almost as bad as we are about sleep. Naomasa replied testily. No, something happened or something's wrong. Before Shota could reply, Naomasa's phone dinged. I'll send you a report with Midoriya's basic info and public records. If you need something further then I can't help you, Suka-san. From what I could see at an arbitrary glance you have nothing to worry about, but then again I don't know why you're looking into him. I have to sign off for the night. Contact me if there are any changes in the case. Good night. Naomasa stared at his phone, processing the abrupt dismissal he'd just been given. Even Shota was quiet, perhaps seeing the turmoil on his face. Why did they get so weird when I mentioned that name? Naomasa wondered with narrowed eyes. Something was suspicious and he thought that it all had to do with Midoriya somehow. Just who was this kid? 10 months later. Izuku felt a bit like he was dying. His muscles were screaming at him and it felt like he was about to puke out his entrails, but somehow, some miraculous way he'd made it to the finish line. Or was it the starting line? You've worked harder than I could have ever hoped for, Izuku. Toshinori's voice was filled with pride and Izuku felt blood race to his cheeks as he stood there heaving in front of his mentor. You've gone above and beyond multiple times. A lesser man would have given up so many times but not you. You have the spirit of a true hero. Toshinori had reacted remarkably well, all things considered, to finding out that his chosen successor was a wanted vigilante that knew his old detective friend. Izuku could vividly remember the panicked call he'd made to his mentor, mere hours after agreeing to be his successor, to ask if he'd told someone about him. Toshinori had been so confused and admitted that, yes, he'd told his good friend Detective Tsukachi about him. Needless to say, Izuku had to sit the #1 hero down the next day and admit that not only was he a rather well-known analyst that had been active for 5 years now, really, how else would he have afforded the 3 Hydrangeanger buildings under his care? But that he worked closely with the detective and now had to provide an analysis on himself so that Tsukachi could be persuaded that he was a safe bet. All Might had laughed himself hoarse to learn that Izuku was the same Argos that had been the cause of so many sleepless nights for Tsukachi, who was apparently a huge complainer at home, and Izuku vowed that one day when the man found out his identity, he would tease him mercilessly for that. I can think of no one more worthy, more destined. For this power. Toshinori brought his attention back with his passionate speech. Izuku, you are not a hero to the world just yet, but you are my biggest pride and you are my hero. Toshinori beamed at him so wide that Izuku could probably count his teeth if he were so inclined, but tears were choking up his throat and he could hardly focus on the speech, let alone anything else. I am proud to pass on the torch to such a fine young hero, Toshinori said and promptly reached behind himself and plucked out a single gleaming golden strand of hair from the back of his head. Now go ahead and eat this. Izuku blinked. Shota hated this time of year. Entrance exams. There were so many hero hopefuls that came and went through the large UA doors and they had the thankless job of whittling through them all to pick out the top 40. 20 of which were for his class. Class 1A was infamous for its hero production rate. It wasn't just useless bragging either. Shota students went on to be worldwide heroes, not just heroes in Japan. Despite being among the younger teachers in UA, he was 30, his success rate with students was unlike any other hero school in the country. Shota pushed his students to their limits and didn't accept anyone he didn't think had the guts to really do it. There were plenty of powerful kids he had taught in the past and expelled before the preliminary exams. Some had given up on their dreams, and others had entered other hero schools and debuted to be small-time heroes who ended up retiring after a few years of not making it big enough. Shota wasn't heartless. He just knew the real horrors of being a hero, and he had no time for people who were just there to show off or be the second coming of All Might. The hustle and bustle in the offices was giving him a veritable migraine and he couldn't help but wish he was just in bed and didn't have to deal with any of this. His patrol had ended up lagging on with problem after problem and he'd only gone to bed around 5 in the morning before coming to UA a scant 2 hours later to deal with the fresh hell of entrance exams. Oh come on, it's not that bad, Nemuri teased. We only do this every year, Sho, you'd think you'd be used to it by now. Shota barely contained his scowl. Just kill me and put me out of my misery if I ever get used to this, Nemuri, he mumbled from behind his thermos of coffee. You'll know my body was hijacked if I ever show up to entrance exams day and look used to it all. Nemuri laughed loudly, musing his hair in the same annoying way she used to do when they were kids, not unlike the kids pouring into the wide-open UA doors now. You crack me up, Sho-chan, she sang, and Shota just huffed. He'd long ago given up trying to make her stop calling him that stupid nickname. They made their way to the observation deck, and Shota's eyes ached with the sheer amount of screens that were pasted on all sides of them. Nizu sat at the head of the table, a tablet in his hands paws, with a scarily excited expression on his face that sent shivers down Shota's spine. He looked towards his colleagues, and Sekijiro shook his head, looking mildly ill. Someone completed his extra credit section on the heroics entrance papers and had the guts to ask for more paper, Sekijiro muttered when Shota took his seat beside the other heroics homeroom teacher that presided over Class B. Shota shuddered. Yep, that would cause the inner demon hiding in Nizu to rear its head. Shota wanted absolutely nothing to do with a student that, interesting, but he had a sneaking suspicion that things weren't going to go his way. By the time afternoon rolled around, they'd already been through several batches of students, and now it was time for the 6th batch. In the previous batch, there had been a lot of students that showed promise and a lot that Shota was sort of glad to be rid of. He didn't have a lot of patience dealing with students, a surprise considering his job was literally to teach them, but he had even less patience for students who only had a fancy quirk going for them. People who had explosive quirks that had grown up being told from birth how amazing they were only to get to UA's entrance exams and be faced with the reality that they were nothing without their quirks. Every year it was the same deal without fail. So much promise foiled by ego and a lack of motivation or drive past being the best. Shota sipped his coffee leisurely, his thermos had already been refilled twice, eyeing the screens as the buses finally arrived. The examinees poured off and Shota accepted a new stack of application papers for this group of examinees. Anyone to watch out for? Nemuri asked, her eyes glued to the screen while she fiddled with some fidget thing in her hands. Shota speed-read through the stack of papers in front of him. Tensei's younger brother is in this batch, he mentioned, noting Tenya's name and profile. Tensei had been horrified when his brother failed the recommendation exam, but none had been more downtrodden than Tenya himself, so Shota was kind of crossing his fingers that the kid pulled through today. There's a gravity quirk that's kind of interesting, something to do with plants. There's a quirk here that just says, superpower. There were a few snorts. Shota looked up, holding the paper in his fingers, and stared at the screen briefly. He was about to go back to rifling through the papers when he caught sight of one of the screens, and before he could fully realize what he was doing, he'd used his flat screen pad to navigate the cameras closer to the examinees, unintentionally forcing everyone else to see what had caught his attention. It was a boy. He was average height, maybe a bit short but not overly so, and pale with a few freckles brushing his nose and cheeks. His stark emerald hair contrasted with the more natural colors of the boy's peers. Shota noticed that his eyes were closed tightly and he seemed to be breathing rhythmically. In his hand he was clutching something that was hanging on a chain around his neck, but what really stood out was the dark strip tied around his left arm that showed that he was in a PRD of mourning. Wadash, Nemuri was going to ask, but she paused when the boy lifted the chain to his mouth, pressing a kiss to whatever was on the necklace. He held the pendant properly and held it up to the sky, as if offering it to the heavens. This is for you, my stars. The boy mouthed the words and Shota pet his head, releasing the camera back to Nizu's control. The stuff looked curious. I thought he had something in his hands. Sorry, Shota said, though it was a lie. He just thought the gesture was sweet and had moved before thinking. He looked back down at the papers in his hands, lifting the superpower one and blinking when he realized it was the same boy. Oh, he's the superpower kid, he mentioned. Midoriya Izuku. Where had he heard that name before? Something niggled in the back of his head and he could swear he'd heard the name Midoriya somewhere, but for the life of him he couldn't remember, and he just knew it was going to bother him. He must be quite powerful. Sekijiro hummed approvingly. Look, he's the first into the arena. Shota looked up, paying attention to the screens as Hizashi's enthusiastic voice started the exam. Sure enough, Midoriya was the first to streak into the arena, and Shota liked that, But the boy didn't go towards anywhere expected. Instead he seemed to run, and then veer off into one of the alleys. The camera angle switched, as if Nizu was curious about the boy too, and they watched, eyes habitually catching onto other cameras to mind the other examinees too, as the boy first watched the sheer chaos of fights in the area and then seemed to determine something before beginning to rifle through a trash bin. His expression was odd, as if he were thrilled. He strapped several medals to his body and selected a large pipe from a pile of scrap they chucked there from Mijima's classes. "What on earth dash?" Ken blurted, expression utterly bemused. "He has a quirk, what's he going through the trash for?" "Not many people look through the trash, this is quite a first. And he's exceptionally smart too, look, he's strapped medals to his body to confuse the robots." Nizu pointed out. "When we programmed them, we added the failsafe that they wouldn't destroy each other or the buildings, otherwise we'd have buildings coming down all the time. He's figured that out and found a way to make the robot sensors see the metal first and deem him safe, as they are not programmed to fight each other," Nizu said gleefully. The expression on the stout's face was nothing short of downright creepy. Shota watched, feeling quite impressed, as the boy raced through the arena. The first robot he came across, a two-pointer, he easily dispatched by stabbing the pole straight through its head. From there, he seemed to be making extremely fast work of going through the robots, keeping up with other students who were using all kinds of quirks. "I want him in my class." Shota spoke before he even computed it. There were a few chuckles, but Shota was deathly serious. He'd never seen someone with a quirk use so many different methods to win, and he was impressed with it. It was obvious in the lithe way Midoriya Izuku moved, the way he utilized his environment, using the pole to vault faster through the debris of the arena, that he had been training himself for the exam for a while. He had obvious dedication and drive, and that was what Shota wanted to see in his students. He was only more impressed when he watched the boy step in during several different instances to help his fellow competitors, losing villain points in favor of rescue points, not that the boy or anyone else knew this. "Time for the zero-pointer," Nizu said gleefully, pressing a glaringly red button on the dashboard. Shota was prepared for the rumbling, but as always it startled the examinees, who immediately booked it for the opposite direction. Shota noted that Midoriya Izuku was no different. What was different, though, was the way he came to a freezing stop in the middle of the street. His head whipped to the side and the camera just barely captured the horror on his face before he took off, running directly at the zero-pointer. "Tag him," Shota said, pushing down a sudden worry in his chest as he took control of the cameras to tail Midoriya. Netsu took control of a different camera to see what had caught the boy's attention. One of the other examinees, a girl, was trapped under some fallen rubble, and they watched as several students ran right past her, ignoring her cries for help. Shota barely contained his snarl of disgust. These students, regardless of if they had the points or not, would never know the inner halls of UA if he had anything to say about it. "Nizu, the zero-pointer," Snipe pointed out, but he was ignored. Shota frowned, holding in his own urge to press the stop button on the exam, focusing instead on the monitors as Midoriya reached the girl and they spoke. "Audio," Nemuri requested immediately, and Nizu fiddled with something before a filtered audio reached them, taking out the ambient sounds of explosions, robots, and whistling air, and leaving only the voices. "Limit." "I can't move," the girl said, sounding terrified. "Hey, don't worry, okay? I've got you," Midoriya assured. He leveraged his pole under the rock and looked up, slightly stressed. They could all clearly see why, since the zero-pointer was getting closer at an alarming speed, yet Nizu showed no sign of slowing anything down. "You think you can wait here for a second while I deal with that robot? That robot-chan is getting a little too close for comfort, huh?" he said, keeping his voice light and teasing, but Shota could hear the thread of anxiety in it as the girl giggled tearfully. "I'm fine, but are you gonna be okay? That thing is huge," she worried, and Midoriya turned a blinding smile on the girl. Nemuri beamed at the smile, tapping her fingernails against the table in front of her, her expression clearly showing her approval. "Don't worry about me, I've got this," he said, teeth gleaming, and he was off. Shota swallowed. They barely had a second to process his words as he suddenly began to run up the body of the robot. This was no small feat, and Shota's lips parted slightly in shock as he watched the boy jump from limb to limb, never staying in one place long enough to slip or fall, until he was balancing right on the zero-pointer's shoulder. "Sorry, Robot-chan, I wanted to do this whole thing without this quirk, but a hero's gotta save first," Midoriya said and lifted his arm. Shota didn't even dare blink as the boy punched right into the robot's face. He could feel the backlash even from the watchtower, and he cursed out loud as he watched the boy fall. Jesus? Was his arm broken? Shota could see it sort of flailing around as he fell, and the cameras clearly picked up his alarmed and pained expression. "What the hell even is this kid?" Maijima blurted, gaping at the screens. He was holding one of the small screens in his hands, bringing it closer to his face in shock. The robot was coming down fast, scattering debris all over the place, and Midoriya used even that to his advantage, descending the height by racing across each shard as if they were simply steps for him to use. And yes, his arm was clearly broken. The skin peeking through his sleeve was bruised and mottled. When he was close enough to the ground, he fell in a neat roll next to Uraraka Ochiko, the gravity girl, who was thankfully unharmed by the debris, tucking his broken arm against his body so that he didn't damage it further. "Wow!" the girl exclaimed, and Midoriya stood up, hurrying over to her. "That was incredible," she shouted. Midoriya gave a small chuckle. He held his arm against his body a bit tighter, and every inch of his body was trembling with pain. Shota was deeply impressed with the boy's behavior and clear practice and training, but he found himself disappointed after seeing how little control he had over his quirk. "Let's get you out of there now. You're definitely gonna need some medical attention, and well, yeah, I'm probably going to need some too, huh?" He laughed awkwardly, not even showing an inch of his pain in front of the girl. "If you don't mind, could you get out of there as fast as you can once I lift this?" Midoriya asked kindly, and with that he pressed down, using his good arm, on the pole he'd put there earlier. Gravity did its work, and the rock lifted off the girl with a lot of wind, crashing into the floor beside them as the girl literally raced to Midoriya's side. She fell almost in a heap with a small cry, and Midoriya did his best to heft her on his good side, though his arms were trembling. "Hey now, I've got you, you're good. You did amazing," Midoriya assured. "You got enough points?" "No idea," the girl admitted. "I was getting points up to when that monster robot got here. Someone caused a rock fall out of that building over there, and I was caught under it. They totally left me there when they saw me." Midoriya frowned at that, and he wasn't the only one. They all scowled at what they were hearing as Hizashi called the final seconds of the exam. "Point them out to me, okay?" Midoriya said, beginning to walk to the entrance. They were walking arm in arm together, lending each other strength. "If you're scared to talk to the administrators, then I'll let them know what happened so they know not to accept someone like them into the hero course. He's confident, sweet, heroic, and handsome. Oh, this one is going places." Nemuri cried. "Look at how sweetly he's holding her." The audio cut off as Nizu returned the cameras to their normal positions in the arena. Medical bots were filling the spaces, and Shota watched as Midoriya placed the girl safely on a stretcher before obviously attempting to walk away from another stretcher himself. He wasn't sure what possessed him, but he reached for the little microphone and spoke, letting his voice ripple through the arena. "Examinee 4356, get on the DMN stretcher and go get that arm healed. Now." He couldn't help scolding, and he let go of the microphone, snorting at the obvious panic from the boy as he looked down at his own shirt and realized he was the examinee being scolded. His colleagues laughed too, and Shota said, eyes narrowing, "I reiterate, Nizu, I want that one in my class." Midoriya Izuku. There was something about him, and Shota was determined to get to the bottom of it. It irked him that someone who had displayed such ingenuity and quick thinking had seemed to put zero effort into controlling his quirk. It was a liability. Even late developers put in the work to control their quirks, and with a power like Midoriya's it was understandable that it might have come in a bit late, but the latest quirks came in was still 7 or 8. That meant he'd had, give or take, at least that same amount of time to hone his quirk. Shota was going to get to the bottom of Midoriya, and he was going to do it with the same methods that had taken his students either to the highest of the high or, inevitably, to the lowest of the low. That was life. To some it could be cruel, but to Shota, who had lost too many people to the field of heroics, It wasn't cruel enough sometimes. I won't let you idiots kill yourself on my watch, Shota vowed silently as he sifted through the next batch of examinees. Not again. Izuku was going to kill Toshinori. He was exhausted after the exam and more than a little devastated over having used one for all, but he couldn't regret it with the girl's warm, alive body hanging off his good arm. Seriously, Toshinori was going to get a talking to about his advice. Just clench your butt cheeks and yell smash. Seriously. It was bad enough that he'd given that advice, but it was more than a little mortifying that Izuku had actually followed it and had ended up with a shattered arm. By the way, I don't know your name. Izuku mentioned, and the girl walking along with him turned bright red. Uraraka Achiko. She blurted. Thanks for saving me. Izuku smiled warmly. Midoriya Izuku, and it was no problem. You saved me earlier, remember? Saved me from eating the concrete, ha. He inwardly cringed at even mentioning that embarrassing moment, but it seemed to cheer Uraraka up. Oh, here comes some stretchers, let's get you settled down. He placed her right on the stretcher and stepped back, trying to ignore the other stretcher that was obviously meant for him. The little medical bot that was pressing against his shin seemed pretty insistent, but Izuku was kind of hoping if he didn't acknowledge his broken arm that meant it didn't happen. Futile he knew, but oh well. However, it was not to be as a crackly voice sounded over the speakers. Examinee 4356, get on the stretcher and go get that arm healed. Now. Izuku blanched, looking down as he recognized his vest number, and Uraraka burst into soft giggles at his mortified expression when he finally sat down and let the bots carry them back to the front of the arena. He wasn't sure who had just scolded him, but his cheeks were bright red because of it, and he was only barely holding in a childish pout. At the front, Uraraka shyly pointed out the students who had ignored her under the rocks, and Izuku worked hard to contain his scowl at the raven-haired boy who was walking around quite smugly announcing the amount of robots he'd taken down and how he was sure he'd be getting into you no matter what. I'll deal with it, don't worry, Uraraka-san. Izuku promised. Recovery girl looked at him as he arrived and scowled so deeply that Izuku was certain the crockety old woman would never be able to smoothen her face out of that scowl again. It wasn't exactly Izuku's first time meeting the heroine, as she had been the first to meet Izuku after he'd inherited one for all barely a week ago. The first time he'd used it, he'd broken his arm badly enough that Toshinori had nearly puked blood from how worried he was. Granted, Izuku had been in so much pain that he'd nearly been puking blood himself, but it had worked out in the end with his mother, wide-eyed and aghast at learning Izuku had manifested a quirk out of the blue while training, setting his bones for him, and Toshinori calling over his doctor, which had turned out to be Recovery Girl. After the scolding they'd both gotten, Izuku had decided not to use OFA during the exam, and he desperately wanted to complete the exam quirkless either way, but it seemed both of those goals had been futile in the end. With his arm now healed and set in a simple bandaged cast, Izuku made his way to where a clone, presumably, of the pro-hero Ectoplasm was standing and taking back their visitor badges at the exit. He quelled his inner fanboy as his turn approached. Good afternoon, Ectoplasm greeted politely when it was his turn in front of the hero. Izuku smiled and pulled out his badge, passing it over. Is there, somewhere I can lodge a small piece of unsolicited advice before I leave? He asked embarrassedly, and Ectoplasm stilled for a second before having to actually cover his mouth to stifle his snort of laughter. The guy behind Izuku in the crowd looked alarmed. I was warned you might approach and was told to let you know that the cameras captured everything and there's no need to worry. Ectoplasm said after he'd regained control of himself, and Izuku pinkened. Right on, he said awkwardly. It's really good to meet you, Ectoplasm-san. The hero grinned at him and held his hand up for a high five, which Izuku immediately took advantage of before hurrying past him and out the hallowed doors of UA Academy. There was nothing more to it now than to wait. For all that Izuku wanted to scold Toshinori for his terrible advice, he never actually got around to it as they waited for the test results to come back. It had been shaping up to be the longest week of his life, but Izuku had plenty of things to distract him other than trying to hound Toshinori into telling him the results. His mentor was surprisingly tight-lipped and refused to say anything. Are you all packed, honey? His mother poked her head into his room and he looked up, sending her a warm smile. Yep, I'm just waiting for Toshinori-san to get here. he explained. He was sitting with his laptop open and doing some work as Argos while he waited. His mother was fully aware of his other job and had in fact been the one to support him learning how to code and hack. She'd tousled his hair gently and had told him, "Good job, honey. If the world is determined to be bad under the cover of their precious quirks and laws, then you should just be determined to catch them in the act and show the world how pathetic they all are." Those words had stuck with him, and to this day he admired and feared the mean streak his mother could sometimes hold towards those she deemed unworthy or pathetic. "All right, let me know before you leave, honey. I'm going to head out to work now, but don't worry, I've got Natsuki-chan in charge of the kids and Aiko-san in charge of Natsuki-chan." Izuku laughed at that. After the explosive inheritance of One for All, they'd returned to Hydrangeanger and had revealed to Izuku's whole community that he had a quirk now. A tiny part of him had been expecting them to kick him out. He'd been expecting to see jealousy, or sadness, or even distrust, all the things he was sure he might have felt if he'd been in their places, but they'd all proved to him just how much better than him they all were by treating him with absolute love and celebration. Izuku wasn't sure he'd even stopped crying at all that day. With 5 days left before the test results came out, Izuku was traveling to Yamanashi and then Chiba to visit the 2 other Hydrangeanger houses he owned in order to tell the people there about his quirk in person so that they didn't find out later and think him more a liar than he actually was. When he heard about it and saw how anxious Izuku was over the whole prospect of revealing his quirk to the people he was closest to, Toshinori insisted on coming along for moral support and to see the other Hydrangeanger houses. His mentor had become something of a regular within the walls of the safe house that was home to so many world-weary quirkless and homeless children and adults. He'd become increasingly popular with the kids, especially after taking over in the kitchen one night and making an American feast for dinner. He had no doubt that Toshinori would charm all the occupants in both Yamanashi and Chiba with ease, and he looked forward to seeing it too. It was rare that he got to visit the other Hydrangeanger houses outside of vacations when it wasn't for a funeral, so he was looking forward to the visit. The mourning band around his left arm felt as heavy as ever, and he knew that many of his family thought it was unhealthy for him to wear the mourning band for a full month every time, but for Izuku it was the least that he could do for these souls that slipped him by. For the dreamers who could no longer dream. His phone dinged and he picked it up, snorting at the message there. "Toshinori. I'm here." "Izuku. Somehow that still doesn't get old. I'll be down in a minute." Downstairs, Toshinori beamed at him the second he stepped out of Hydrangeanger after a round of goodbyes and tearful hugs from the kids. He had a huge bundle of letters and gifts for all their friends in the other prefectures to deliver. "Ready to go?" Toshinori made sure, and Izuku hummed as they set off for the train station. It was a short 3-hour train ride to Yamanashi Prefecture, and they'd spend 2 days there before making their way to Chiba and then back to Mizudafu in time for the letter of acceptance, or rejection, to arrive. For the most part the journey was spent talking about the entrance exam, the quirk, and Izuku trying to find any scrap of information that he could use to make this quirk work for him. Toshinori was the best mentor he could ever ask for, but his specialty wasn't exactly in the field of analysis, and he didn't have a lot of actually helpful advice for Izuku in terms of how to not break his arms, so Izuku had to figure that part out for himself at some point. The Hydrangeanger house in Yamanashi was quite a bit bigger than the first one Izuku had opened. It was a large building just outside a residential area, on the outskirts of Kofu City in the lower income area. Izuku tapped a gentle pattern on the door and waited for someone to let them in. They didn't typically use special knocks or have very many rules, but there was an existing rule of the houses not to bring guests back unless they were thoroughly vetted by Izuku first. Izuku had a knock he used that everyone in the community was familiar with to let them know that it was him there. In less than a minute the door was ripped open and there was a loud shout of, "Aizu and I. Guys, it's Aizu and I." Izuku laughed, crouching down to accept the scrambling hugs from all the kids that poured out of the building at the shout. "Is that you, Mizuki-chan? When did you get so tall?" Izuku teased, ruffling the dark-haired 9-year-old's hair until it was all mussed up. She bounced on her heels, trying to look taller. "I'm a big girl now, Aizu and I. I'm the tallest in my class," she bragged, and Izuku laughed, picking her and Ichiro, a stocky 12-year-old, up at the same time to spin them around. The sound of their laughter was beyond healing. "You're all getting so big. I'm so happy to see everyone, he proclaimed, setting them down and greeting a few others before finally drawing their attention to Tashinori, who was standing back and watching them with a smile. Everyone, this is Yagi-san, he's Aizawa's hero sensei. Izuku introduced, using a bit cuter lingo for the kids. A few of the grown-ups looked surprised and Izuku spied Kotaro-san, sending him a confused look. Are you guys gonna be good and say hi to him? The kids lined up and turned to Yagi, bowing respectfully and chorusing. Hello Yagi-sama. Thanks for teaching our Aizawa. Izuku couldn't help but laugh at the overly formal greeting. The kids were so cute and he always hated having to leave them whenever he visited because they always cried, breaking his heart, and Izuku always felt like he was leaving behind pieces of his heart with them to protect them in his stead. Well now, it's my pleasure. Tashinori beamed. You'll all have to come and tell me your names, else I'll have to call you all Cutie number 1 or Cutie number 2. The kids shrieked with laughter and ran over to Tashinori to introduce themselves properly while Izuku went up to Koto, the oldest member of their Yamanashi family. Kotaru and her husband Yukiko were the oldest ones here in Yamanashi, and they took care of managing the Hydrangeanger building there and taking care of all the younger kids who stayed there. It's so good to see you, Izuku. Kotaru hugged him tightly. We were surprised when you mentioned you'd be visiting. How long are you staying? Just a day or two, Kotaro-san, he said apologetically. I wish I could stay longer, but Yagi-san and I are heading up to Chiba to visit the home there as well before heading back to Mizudafu. Has something happened? Yukiko asked worriedly, coming forward. Yukiko was something of a father to all the kids here and had always parented Izuku whenever he visited, which was a large part of why he loved Hydrangeanger so much. It truly was as if he had a huge family wherever there was a home opened, and it was part of the reason he was so determined to open another house soon. There's been a lot of changes in my life, Yukiko-san. I just had to come here and talk to you all about it in person. It's kind of crazy, Izuku admitted, and he allowed himself to be pulled inside and fussed over for a bit. In Hydrangeanger, no matter where it was, everyone helped out, so in no time at all they were all settled in the large recreation room with snacks and tea. Izuku found himself with a whole room full of people staring at him and waiting for him to explain things. I was really hesitant to come here and talk about this, but I could never dream of keeping it from any of you, Izuku said softly, but everyone heard him. He sat nervously, anxiously nodding his hands into fists on his knees as he sat before them all. The truth is, I developed a quirk. Huh? Mizuku screamed. Really? That's amazing, Aizawa. I bet it's something really cool. Wait, but how is that possible, Izuku? Kotaro was the voice of reason in the storm of sudden excitement and overwhelming chatter. It's unheard of to develop a quirk so late. You're 18, Izuku, that's impossible. Because of the nature of Izuku's quirk, it would have hurt him egregiously had it developed any sooner than it did, Tashinori explained evenly. As it stands, his quirk has a major setback that makes him break his bones whenever he uses it because of its power. Izuku was slightly mollified by the sheer horror in the faces of his friends and family in Yamanashi. You all know I wanted to be a hero, Izuku said earnestly. I wanted to be a hero that could stand up and change the world. Maybe it's arrogant to want to change the world, but it was my dream and I was going to try anything to achieve that. I started training for UA with Yagi-san, and as my muscles started getting stronger, my body started becoming compatible with my quirk. It developed fully a week ago, just before the entrance exams, and it made me break both my arms. Izuku told the story they'd told to the others back home as well. Oh Aizu, this is, so your Kotaro was utterly speechless. From the back, standing against the wall, one of the kids around Izuku's age straightened up and drew all attention to himself. You look so anxious, Midoriya, Kaito said strongly. You're worried we're all going to be upset or jealous, and if I know you at all then I guess you're worried we're all gonna think you're betraying us or something, but you're not. Kaito is right, Izuku-kun. We don't get to decide who gets quirks and who doesn't, Ichiro added gently, and tears filled Izuku's eyes. You are the one who taught us this. Your courage and kindness, your conviction and strength. It doesn't surprise any of us at all that you're going to make an amazing hero. Having a quirk or not doesn't change that. Tears spilled down his cheeks and Nezuko laughed, racing forward and hugging him tightly, inspiring an honest-to-God cuddle pile all around him. "We're happy for you, Aizawa. You're gonna be a great hero." Izuku couldn't even tell who said that over the sound of his sobbing, but he cracked his eyes open and saw Tashinori beaming at him proudly. Maybe everything was going to be okay? Izuku wasn't one for heedless dreaming, not after so many of his dreams had been bruised and battered and crushed in his youth. Not after the box in his bedroom that contained all of the letters, the hopes and dreams, fears and sadnesses of all the family he'd lost. But maybe just this once he could let himself hope. After a similar trip to Chiba, it was an extremely happy and hopeful duo who returned to Mizudafu 5 days later. Izuku had been overwhelmed with gifts and letters for all the people back home, and Tashinori had to help him carry it all inside in 2 hefty duffel bags. They both froze in the doorway, finding the entire household standing in the living room and practically brimming with excited energy. Even the cats were there, loudly lounging in the patches of sun streaming throughout the room. Cherry was bouncing on her heels and smiling gleefully as she pointed to a nondescript envelope on the table in front of them all. "It came this morning," his mother said happily. "We didn't open it, of course, but we all just had to see if you made it." It felt like Izuku's heart was going to explode out of his chest. He put the bags down slowly and approached the letter as if it were a bomb. A few of his family snickered at him, but no one interfered in the process as he picked the letter up, feeling the weight of it in his palm. Behind him, Tashinori was silent, but there was an air of pride that just seemed to radiate from him as Inko stood by his side to wait for the results. Inside the envelope there was a thick metal disc and a folded letter. He placed the letter down without opening it and held the disc with shaking hands. There was a button on the disc and he swallowed past a lump in his throat, feeling the pressure of everyone's eyes on him, and pressed it, bracing himself for anything that would happen. He wasn't the only one who tensed, waiting for something to happen, and it was the right move for all of them as a holographic form of his mentor popped up, looking every bit as iconic as he did in the news. There were a few startled screams and Izuku stared at the hologram in dazed shock despite the hero literally standing behind him. "I am here." Holographic All Might laughed awkwardly. "In holographic form. You may be wondering why I am here, and it is my pleasure to announce that I will be the new UA teacher for Foundational Heroics." All Might announced brightly, and Izuku already knew this, but he still felt a thud of happiness that his mentor of almost a year wouldn't be leaving his side after all. Behind him, Tashinori came forward and placed a bracing, calming palm on his back while his mother touched her hand to his shoulder gently in support. "Young Midoriya, you have scored an impressive 67 villain points with your strategic takedown of robots in your section. Your quick thinking and innovative actions have done you well." All Might praised, and the number was way higher than Izuku had thought it would be. "That's not all. Due to your bleeding heart and your kind actions in saving your fellow competitors' dash, the hologram showed several instances of Izuku helping the other students, including his final act of saving Uraraka. You have also received 45 rescue points." Izuku's mouth felt dry. "This, paired with your above excellent written exam marks, places you right as the top scorer in UA this year with 112 points overall. You totally beat my record of 110 points." All Might sounded thrilled at this. "And so it is my pleasure to welcome you, Midoriya Izuku, to your Hero Academia." With that the disc went silent. The room was deathly silent, and Izuku thought this was what it must feel like to die and be reborn. It felt like the world was racing past him, and yet inside their little home, everything was still. And then the world exploded. He did it. Standing at the gates of UA, Izuku wondered if anyone would ever be able to understand how much of an imposter he felt like. He didn't know if he belonged there or not. He didn't know if the people there were going to accept him, or if, like all his life, they'd look down on him with sneers painted across their noses. He was terrified to step through the gates and acknowledge that yes, he was a student of UA. A hero student at that. His phone chimed in his pocket and he took it out, taking any opportunity to procrastinate. All week friends from Hydrangeanger had been texting him good luck messages that had left him feeling warm and supported, but this wasn't from a member of Hydrangeanger, at least not officially. Toshinori. Good luck today, my boy. I believe in you. He smiled, feeling something settle in his chest. That's right. Toshinori was there. Everything was going to be okay, so he stepped forward and through the gates, scanning his student ID card and brought up a map of the school on his phone. It still took him a minute and asking for a few directions before he finally came across the right classroom. The door itself was impressive, spanning almost the entire way to the roof with 1A in large red lettering that made the whole place feel larger than life. He took a deep breath and entered. The classroom wasn't full by any means. There were a few early birds like him, but mostly the room was empty with numbered rows of chairs and desks. According to his seating chart that he'd been sent, he was to be seated in number 18, which was right next to a window. Since there was still time before orientation started, judging by the lack of students there yet, Izuku cracked open his notebook and started taking some notes for his work as Argos. He'd been commissioned by a hero company to do analysis on all of their sidekicks, and it had been taking all of his spare time recently, but it was paying for several of the kids' school supplies and tuition, so he couldn't complain. His notes were obviously all encoded with a code he'd made himself years ago to protect his analysis, and which he now used to protect his work that he did for heroes pretty much all around the world. Whereas as a child he'd done analysis for fun, now he did it for the pretty hefty fee, and he was paid well to analyze different quirks for different heroes and sometimes villains, depending on who was asking for the analysis, since he exclusively worked with heroes. By the time he lifted his head, the classroom was teeming with students, and Izuku stilled, feeling a prickle down his spine. Deku. Izuku swallowed, lifting his head up and meeting Bakugo's crimson eyes. Bakugo, he said boldly. Bakugo's eyes widened, and for a split second he was his again, but just as fast those eyes narrowed and he sat down heavily in the seat in front of Izuku's. Izuku smiled awkwardly as he made eye contact with a few of his new classmates. He recognized the dark blue-haired boy as the guy who had told him off for mumbling during the written exam, and he recognized Uraraka and waved at her in greeting. He had the strangest feeling that they were all being watched, though. It was just a feeling, a weird prickle down his spine, but it was uncomfortable. His eyes scanned the room and found nothing out of the ordinary other than a few students standing around and chattering, so he dropped lower, catching sight of Abu. What was it? A worm? A human? It was a man. He was lying right on the ground in a garish yellow sleeping bag and blatantly staring directly at Izuku, who blinked in confusion. The man smirked, despite that he looked exhausted, which, honestly, same, and kind of like he didn't even want to be there. When 2 or 3 other students finally noticed the man lying there, he stood up fluidly, leaving the sleeping bag behind him on the floor. He was holding a clipboard in hand, and Izuku's eyes sharply took in all the details he could. He was tall, much taller than Izuku, with pale skin and dark hair that tumbled wildly over his shoulders. He wore a dark jumpsuit, or were they pants and a shirt that was dark enough to blend together. There were rounds and rounds of thin bandage-like scarves around his neck, and Izuku caught the glint of something gold beneath the gray scarves. He inhaled sharply. This was the pro-hero Eraserhead. It took you all way too long to notice I was here. Do better. The man's voice was gravelly, and though soft it echoed around the room as he glared at them all. I'm your homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shoda. Put your gym uniforms on and make your way outside for a quirk apprehension test. You have 15 minutes. Anyone late will regret it for the rest of their time here. With that, the man slapped several sets of uniforms on the table and left the classroom. Everyone was slightly frozen. Izuku did not want to find out what this man's bad side looked like, so he was the first out of his seat, and he grabbed the uniform with his name on it and made his way to the boys' locker room. He was endlessly grateful that he'd studied the map so obsessively that he knew where the locker rooms were. He politely pretended that he hadn't in fact gotten lost just that morning. To his relief, they had private stalls, and Izuku grabbed the first one to get changed in as the other boys trickled in behind him. By the time he exited his stall, he noticed the other boys there, but he didn't stay to chat. Was he a coward? Probably. Aizawa was standing in the middle of the field, holding his clipboard and a tumbler and looking like he wanted to be buried under several heavy blankets. He noticed Izuku's timid arrival and arched his brow. 6 minutes, not bad. Aizawa commented. Izuku wasn't sure what to say to that, so he just smiled a bit nervously. There seemed to be a wait ahead of them, so he took a moment to scan the grounds. He could see several of UA's buildings, and there were plenty of students roaming around now as they prepared for the welcome assembly. Izuku checked his watch, noting that the others only had a few minutes before they were late. Fortunately, they were joined by others, most of the girls and a few guys. The last to arrive was a really short boy with 4 grape-like balls on his head, and a girl that was solid pink with green eyes and little horns protruding from her head. "You guys cut it pretty short," Aizawa scolded. "Either way, as I said before, this is a quirk apprehension test dash." "But what about the welcome assembly?" the pink-skinned girl asked worriedly. Aizawa scowled at being interrupted. "The assembly is irrelevant. If you're just here to make friends, then I'd go ahead and leave now. The school lets me teach however I like, and I say you're going to do a quirk apprehension test. If you have problems with that, then feel free to leave." Aizawa said a bit darkly. "Midoriya," he said suddenly, and Izuku swallowed as the attention went, quite suddenly, to him. "Why, sensei? You're our top scorer this year. Come up here and throw this ball." "What was your furthest throw in high school?" Aizawa asked, tossing him a ball. Izuku had never done PE in high school, nor before that. As a Quirkless, he wasn't expected to have the strength to play with his stronger, quirked peers, let alone pitch a ball. "It was 60 meters, he lied, using an average standard that he remembered from weaker quirked students back in high school. "I wasn't much of a pitcher." Aizawa looked faintly amused at that. "Throw this ball using your quirk in any way you deem it possible." Izuku blinked at the ball. But that wasn't going to work. He couldn't risk using one for all on a simple apprehension test. Behind him, he could hear Bakugo snort derisively. Trying to ignore the weight on his shoulders, he stood in the circle and threw the ball as hard as he humanly could. It would be unimpressive, sure, but not all quirks could be calculated by how far you could throw a ball, so it should be fine. The ball soared and fell a bit anticlimactically a few meters away. A device beeped in Aizawa's hand. 68 meters. Aizawa announced, and Izuku had to contain his full body shiver at the man's absolutely dark tone. The crowd behind him were deathly silent save for Bakugo's soft cackling. "You've been told since birth to not use your quirks? Well, today you're going to throw all of that aside. Today you're allowed to use your quirk in whatever way you deem it possible to get through this test, and unlike whatever the hell Midoriya just did here, I expect you all to actually put some effort in." Izuku pressed his lips together in an effort not to gape at the man like an actual idiot. What? It felt like the ground was sinking beneath him, swirling like the maelstrom that had just erupted in his chest. This was supposed to be different. Yurare was supposed to be different, Toshinori had said, and Izuku had a quirk now. He had a quirk now, so why was everything still the same? Izuku decided that this had to be an isolated incident. Surely, it would be different now because he had a quirk, and even though he couldn't use it that well, it surely had to count for something, or else he'd really be too pathetic. This was Eraserhead. He fought basically quirkless all the time. The man was an icon to Izuku and to Izuku's entire family of quirkless or low-quirked people as the only hero in Japan that made them believe that they too could be heroes. He couldn't be like everyone else. He just couldn't. "Oh, this is going to be so much fun." The pink girl squealed, now much happier about missing the assembly. It was the wrong thing to say, apparently, because Aizawa's scowl, which had already been impressively scary, seemed to darken even more. It was quite a terrifying visual, and Izuku silently walked back to his place among the other students, his head hanging low and avoiding eye contact with everyone else. "Fun, huh? How's this for fun? The student in last place will be expelled at the end of the test," he said with a note of finality in his voice, and Izuku knew, without a doubt, that he meant every word he spoke. The silence would almost be amusing if Izuku weren't inwardly panicking much like the rest of the class. "Now stand in line. The first test is a standing long jump," Aizawa said, stepping back, and Izuku had a sneaking suspicion that his hope and good feelings from earlier that morning were about to come and bite him in the butt. He didn't do too bad in the tests. While he'd only had his quirk for less than 3 weeks now, he'd been working for months on strength training and had taken several martial arts courses on Toshinori's advice in order to fully prepare for his place in the world of heroics. For the long jump he took it at a small run and his results were on the higher end of average for a person without a strength-related quirk. He did better on the jump than one of his classmates that was invisible and another that could shoot lasers from his navel, which would be helpful in theory, but he threw up after a second of using it, which Izuku could honestly relate to. For the sidesteps and grip tests, he did his best, but he felt like he constantly had Aizawa's dark eyes glaring at him and it was kind of throwing him off. But no, it was different. It had to be different. He had already thrown his ball, so he stood to the side while the others took their turns. Bakugo seemed thrilled with his 807-meter throw, which he'd thrown with an empathetic die at the top of his lungs, though no one could do better than Uraraka's Infinity or Yaoyorozu making an actual cannon. Not going to throw the ball again, Midoriya? Aizawa said suddenly, after the last student had gone, and again Izuku froze. What was his problem? I don't think the result will be any better, sensei. He said truthfully. There was only so far he could throw a ball after all. Aizawa scoffed, looking down at his clipboard and calculating the results. Izuku pressed his lips together as the screen behind him started flickering with names. His eyes nervously tracked all the way down the list, noting Bakugo in 5th place, and his stomach curled in horror the lower his eyes dropped until they're, at the very bottom, dead last behind Hagakure Toru and Aoyama Yuga, who he knew he'd beat at almost all of the exercises. Midoriya Izuku. There wasn't a noise on the field. All eyes were on him and it felt like he was sinking through quicksand. There was no way. There was no way those results were accurately calculated. Izuku hadn't been as impressive as other superpowered students, but he'd been far better than several students that lacked strength-based quirks. He'd beat Aoyama and several others in the grip test, and he knew he'd done the running course faster than a lot of them, but somehow he was last. It wasn't supposed to be this way. You impressed me in the exams, but your lack of dedication to honing your quirk and your inability to do your best or even try disappoints me and makes me believe that you cannot be a hero. Pack up your things and leave, Midoriya. Aizawa's voice seemed to echo through a tunnel before reaching his ears, all warbled and echo-y. You're expelled from the hero course. Expelled. The word echoed around his ears, and for a moment he was certain he was about to pass out. The others were all whispering, and he could hear Bakugo laughing cruelly at someone he deemed lesser, pathetic, useless, while Yaoyorozu seemed to be melting down at realizing the threat was real. Someone said his name in a gentle, trembling voice, but Izuku barely heard it. Everything was roaring in his ears, and it felt like he was standing in the eye of a tornado with his life swirling around him in a never-ending storm until everything went utterly still and one single word slipped past his lips, quieting the storm entirely. No. Silence. No. Aizawa's voice sounded dangerous. Izuku looked up, meeting the man's dark eyes. He wasn't afraid. His body was trembling, but he realized suddenly that it wasn't fear making him tremble like this. No, it was anger. I'm not going to let you expel me based on an obviously biased test and a skewered opinion of my character. Izuku said strongly. His chest was burning, there was something rearing its head within him, and he was helpless to hush it when the anger felt so powerful. He felt someone slip their hand into his and he squeezed despite himself, accepting the offer of support though he could hardly even see who it was. Heroics isn't about a quirk, Eraserhead. Izuku purposefully used his hero name and the man's body tensed. You've been an idol to me for years, and not just to me but to a whole community of people who don't have quirks at all, or who have quirks that society deems pathetic. Villainous. Useless. He spat the word out and he could hear a sharp inhale behind him. How was he supposed to go back and tell the others that the one hero they'd managed to find in Japan with a quirkless fight style was? You said I lack dedication in honing my quirk? I developed a quirk through a traumatic incident 3 weeks ago, and every time I use it, it shatters my bones. Izuku snarled. It's only thanks to my mentor's fast action and the fact that he was acquainted with Recovery Girl that I managed to regain full function of my arm in an incident that was completely out of the blue for a quirkless person like me. The hand in his tightened and he turned sideways slightly, noting that it was Uraraka standing at his side. Her expression was deeply upset, and Izuku thought this girl was extremely brave to stand with him while he was yelling at a teacher. At his other side he noticed a spiky redhead take a step forward in support, and stand on his other side with a conflicted frown marring his face. I'm trying my best to control it, but I thought that coming here would help me, would teach me dash, he said in his breath shakily. But if you really think that a powerful quirk is all there is to being a hero, then you aren't the hero I thought you were, Eraserhead, and I'm sorry but that really disappoints me. So fine. Izuku drew himself up to his full height, holding his head high. Go ahead and expel me then. He was breathing heavily, the fight leaving his body as he stood there waiting for the verdict. He didn't slouch, he didn't dare lower his gaze from those dark glaring eyes staring a hole through him. Aizawa was the first to look away. Go grab a syllabus from the classroom, you're all done for the day, he said stiffly. I'll see all of you tomorrow for class. The breath whooshed from Izuku's lungs. It felt like his entire body was strung up and someone had just cut the strings holding him up. He released a shaky breath and braced his palms against his knees to breathe deeply. Aizawa said nothing more, simply turned on his heel and actually stormed away. The second he was gone and out of earshot, Uraraka released a wheezy breath and released his palm to shakily run her fingers through her hair. That was terrifying. She hissed. Oh my god, Midoriya, you're amazing. I didn't do anything, but I would have died on the spot if he'd actually looked at me like that. Izuku thought it was best not to mention he'd almost died a few times himself. I thought he was going to kill me, he mumbled, and she laughed, traces of fear still present. God, Uraraka, thank you for supporting me like that. I really thought I was going to pass out. The other boy, the redhead with spiky hair, patted his back firmly. That was way manly, Midoriya, he said enthusiastically. It was so uncool of him to literally expel you just like that. Yeah, Hagakure piped in, sounding guilty. I did way worse on those tests. I thought for sure I'd be in last place, but he kind of had it in for you. Izuku shuddered. They had no idea. Izuku didn't even know how to process it himself. We shouldn't be praising this. The blue-haired boy who scolded Izuku before snapped. It was disrespectful to the esteemed duo. He's our teacher and a pro hero, how could you question his judgment like that? Izuku liked his parched lips. From the corner of his eye, he could see Bakugo walking ahead of them all, as if he didn't even care to listen to their chatter. There was a red and white-haired boy mere steps behind him, but there didn't seem to be any familiarity between them. It was more like neither of them wanted to be involved in the situation. How can you say that, Ida? Uraraka cried. Midoriya was super heroic during the entrance exams. He totally saved my life. I couldn't just let him get expelled because of a stupid test. What happened at the entrance exams? The pink-skinned girl who Izuku vaguely recalled was Ashido Mina, asked eagerly, cozying up to Uraraka's side. That huge robot was coming right at me and I was caught under a whole bunch of rubble that some kid caused with his quirk. Uraraka told eagerly. Midoriya came right out of nowhere like a hero and bow smash chow. He totally smashed the whole robot and he was falling, and I kid you not, he started running on the debris until he landed right next to me, and even though his arm was kinda gross, sorry, he still managed to get the rocks off of me and we walked back to the nurse station together. Uraraka was quite an enigmatic storyteller, and by the time she was finished Izuku was bright red under the admiring and stunned gazes. Dang, I can't wait to see your quirk in action, Smash Boy. Ashido said excitedly. You were really cool standing up to Aizawa, by the way. I thought that was totally rude of him. Behind them, Ida made a choked noise as if he couldn't believe his own ears but said nothing, thinning his lips into a line and storming ahead of them. Thanks, Izuku said weakly. I felt like I was going to throw up. He was glad the experience was good for a round of laughter and getting to know his new classmates better, but Izuku was an old champion at hiding his feelings behind a pleasant mask. In truth, he was shattered. I believe you can't be a hero. Just like how he'd felt when Toshinori had willfully shattered his dreams, Izuku was left standing with the shards of his admiration at his bleeding feet. He was devastated. Shoto was said. Actually, that didn't even begin to cover it. He was furious. For all that he'd been scolded, in front of his new students, and had been thoroughly mortified because of it, he was furious not because Midoriya had scolded him, but because he was right. Shota loathed just how right he was, and it ate at him as he stormed to the faculty offices to find himself a thermos of coffee and possibly to take up day drinking. "Ooh, what's got your panties in a twist?" Hizashi chirped the moment he walked in, and Shota sent him a dark look. Hizashi straightened up, looking concerned when he realized Shota was actually in a mood. "Odin, what happened?" A few others looked up, and Shota desperately didn't want to have to explain himself because he knew without a doubt that everyone would say Midoriya was right and he himself couldn't even be on his own side because damn it, all Midoriya was right. Our Shota just discovered what it is like to be teaching such a truly fascinating individual as Midoriya Izuku. Nizu's cheerful voice came from behind him and Shota cringed, slouching to the coffee machines. "What happened?" Ken asked curiously, putting down a stack of papers he'd been sorting through. Shota tried to expel Midoriya-kun and, well, Midoriya-kun said no. Nizu giggled. In a truly inspiring speech, supported by his peers, some of whom he had only just met, Midoriya-kun accused Shota of expelling him based on a biased test and a skewed opinion on his character. Shota didn't have to be facing them to know their jaws were hanging on the floor. He clenched his fist around the thermos while his water boiled. He said that Shota, Eraserhead, had been an idol to him and to other Quirkless individuals, presumably because of his own Quirkless fighting style. Shota flinched at that and poured his coffee with stiff motions. Midoriya explained that the reason his quirk hurts him is because he developed it in a traumatic incident 3 weeks ago. Shota heard multiple gasps. "I actually knew of this as an associate of mine and..." Recovery Girl happens to be Midoriya's mentor and requested her aid in healing him after he broke both arms when it manifested. Shota wished he had a wall right in front of him to slam his head into a couple of times. He turned around and faced the shocked looks of his colleagues. He said, if I really think that a powerful quirk is all there is to being a hero, then maybe I'm not the hero he thought I was." Shota said miserably. "After that, all I could do was say I'd see them all in class tomorrow, then I left." Hizashi covered his mouth, as if trying to contain his laugh. "Wow," Snipe drawled amusedly. "He really put you in your place, Shota." Shota couldn't even muster the will to glare at the man. He was FNG right. "Needless to say, Midoriya will not be expelled just yet," Nizu said, stifling another giggle. "Shota, he would benefit from some additional training in order to hone his quirk. You are a registered quirk counselor, of course, so it should be a breeze for you to offer your assistance tomorrow while you apologize to him for your ill-thought actions." Shota sat down at his desk heavily, letting his forehead smack against the table and flashing a morose thumbs up to the principal, who just laughed as he left. "I need to see that footage." Hizashi blurted, and Shota lifted his head, scowling and feeling his quirk flare up in response to his emotions. This seemed to be all that was needed before all of his colleagues burst out laughing. Shota groaned, resting his head down again and sighing. What a sheet day. The rest of the day seemed to drag on, and Shota was relieved to start his patrol if only to get away from his thoughts, but even that didn't give him relief. How could he have been so stupid? There was no excuse for what he'd said to Midoriya, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. It was affecting his ability to concentrate, and he'd taken more than one hit that had been thoroughly unnecessary in hindsight. By the time midnight rolled around, it had been one of Shota's busiest nights in a while, and by extension Naomesa's too. His phone rang while he was taking a short break on a dark corner of a residential building's roof. His leg had taken a pretty nasty hit in the last fight, and he desperately needed the moment of rest to recuperate before he could even think about heading out again. "What crawled up your butt and died, Eraserhead?" Naomesa said the second the call connected. He sounded distinctly unimpressed, and Shota winced. "I feel like I've been chasing your heels all night cleaning up your catches. What happened today?" It felt like all the tension in his body fell to the ground in a neat shatter. He said nothing. What could he say over the phone like this? "Come back to the precinct, Shota," Naomesa sighed. "I'll put the coffee on." And that was that. Shota's patrol ended with the soft thud of his feet against the rooftop of the Mizudafu precinct. He slipped in through Naomesa's open window and noted that the detective was already pouring 2 cups of coffee as if he'd timed it to his arrival. For a while they were both silent, and Shota let himself sink into the fresh, hot coffee and the familiar comfort of Naomesa's shitty couch. I tried to expel a kid today, Shota said bluntly, breaking the silence, and the chair squeaked as Naomasa shifted slightly. Tried? You usually succeed at that, so, tried, is quite a feat. Why didn't you? He asked curiously. The kid looked up at me and said, no, if you can believe it, Shota said tiredly. Accused me of being biased and said that if I expelled him I would be proving that I'm a pathetic excuse of a hero and a disappointment to the world of Quirkless people and to him. Naomasa spat out his coffee. He said what? I may be projecting, Shota admitted. He didn't put it like that, but the meaning is still there. He wasn't even wrong now, I just Just. Shota mulled over his thoughts for a moment. He looked happy. Shota whispered shamefully. He looked so happy to be there now, and I remembered how he was during the exam. He had so much potential and power despite never using his quirk. Shota pressed his lips together tightly. He squeezed his eyes closed. He reminded me of Oboro. Silence, and then, oh Shota. Shota put his cup down and pressed his fingers against his eyes, trying to stem the emotions building in his chest. He came in with so much potential and this vibe of heroism to him, and that DMN quirk of his is so destructive, and all I could think was He's going to die if I let him become a hero. Shota was breathing heavily with the weight of the truth off his shoulders. Naomasa was quiet, letting him work through the roiling thoughts in his head. I told him he couldn't be a hero and tried to expel him. I wasn't even going to actually expel him. I just wanted to scare him a little to make him take this seriously. I don't know, but I made a mistake. Now, I miscalculated and I have to apologize to him. I just hope he accepts it. Shota said, head in his palms. Just who is this kid anyway? Naomasa asked interestedly, lifting his coffee to his lips again as he observed Shota in all his morose glory. His name is Midoriya Izuku. He's some highly superpower? Naomasa spewed his coffee from his lips as he coughed splatters of the liquid all over Shota's cringing body. You told the Midoriya Izuku he couldn't be a hero? Naomasa cried, sounding horrified. Shota's eyes widened. How do you know him? Jesus, Shota, who in this precinct doesn't know him? Naomasa face-palmed. I can't exactly blame you. Even I forgot about him until I had Argos research him for something, and it hit me why his name was so DMN familiar. Naomasa leaned forward, as if he were about to whisper a secret. He's almost an urban legend around here, you know? Who the F did I just piss off now? Shota asked, wide-eyed, and Naomasa snorted. He rolled over to his desk and brought up a few files on his laptop, tilting aside for Shota to see a full profile of Midoriya Izuku. Name, Midoriya Izuku. Quirk, superpower, LBH, 18. Affiliation, Aldra High School, UA University. For the most part this information was standard, and Shota skimmed over the details of his student's previous schooling and quirk status. There was a note that confirmed that, yes, his quirk really had only emerged 3 weeks ago, and followed Naomasa's fingertip to a section labeled Philanthropy. His eyes widened. Midoriya has been affiliated with several charities since the age of 10. He began a charity home for homeless individuals that caters mostly towards the Quirkless community but accepts all sorts of people from discriminated demographics. He started it with help from his mother, see enclosed profile, Midoriya in, but at age 14 he began online work as a freelance firewall engineer, which helped fund the opening of 2 more charity homes in Yamanashi and Chiba Prefecture. See enclosed title deeds and NPO registration. Midoriya has been involved with the Mizudafu trash pickup for several years, but his recent achievement of cleaning the trash zone on Dagoba Beach, see enclosed news article as well as a statement from the Mizudafu trash company, is most notable by far. Further research has shown that Midoriya volunteers at local homeless shelters and specifically volunteers every Sunday at the Pro Hero Present Mixed Charity Food Bank Initiative. See enclosed copy of Midoriya's volunteer registration card. There have been several incidents of Midoriya rehoming homeless animals, and he has been caught multiple times attempting to feed stray cats around Mizudafu. While this is not illegal, he caused several armies of cats around the area which received a number of complaints. resulting in a visit to the Mizudafu precinct where he was told to cease and desist this endeavor. In response, Midoriya made several donations over the span of a few years into developing local pet shelters and adoption drives. See enclosed, police statement. Currently, Midoriya is a student at UA University, though he remains involved with all of these initiatives and has goals to expand on these points in the near future. Naomasa smirked slightly, his lips twitching with amusement. Sansa was the one who had to tell him to stop feeding the stray cats, Naomasa said with a snicker. Apparently he showed up with a bunch of kids and a whole load of cats following behind him. It was a whole ordeal and his mother had to come and pick him up and stuff all those cats in her car. She was not impressed. Shota sat down on the couch heavily. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that you told a kid who has been an everyday hero since he was 10 years old that he couldn't be a hero. Naomasa said, somehow managing to sound both apologetic and amused. Shota didn't even know what to say. He summed it up with a single phrase, well f-. The next morning, Izuku was beyond anxious when he arrived at school. In the end he hadn't been able to bring up the incident with anyone. He hadn't even told Toshinori about it despite the hero enthusiastically asking how his first day went. A small part of him hoped that if he didn't bring it up then he could pretend it had never even happened. Outside of UA, Izuku noticed Uraraka standing there as well and joined her. Oh Midoriya, hey, she greeted warmly. You doing okay? You look a little peaky. Just hoping I'm not about to get expelled, he admitted weakly. I feel like I'm probably going to be on eggshells for the next 10 years after what happened, honestly. She giggled and they both made their way inside. He felt a bit better now that he was with someone who had shown they were brave enough to stand up for a veritable stranger. He admired Uraraka a lot and chatting with her was extremely helpful as she seemed to know all of their classmates and easily helped him put names to all their faces. She'd laughed raucously to learn that he'd been calling them Invisible Girl or Cool Ears Girl, or in the case of Kirishima, Spiky Hair Boy, in his head the whole time. Those nicknames are definitely going to stick, she teased and he blushed. What did you call Ida? Izuku's cheeks turned pinker. He scolded me during the entrance exams so I was just calling him Guy Who Scolded Me. It's not very original. He admitted as they approached Wana's classroom. Uraraka giggled. What's funny? Ashido bounced up to them with a warm smile. Hi, by the way. They both chorused her greeting back to her and Izuku took his seat, waving at them as Uraraka began to whisper to the girl about the embarrassing nicknames. Bakugo was already there, sitting in his seat and sending Izuku a withering scowl as he passed. Izuku tried his best to ignore it. He couldn't stop his knee from jangling slightly and he didn't even realize until much later that he was getting a lot of sympathetic looks from the other students. He sunk a bit lower into the chair and pulled out his notebook to distract himself until homeroom started. When Aizawa stepped into the room Izuku's spine straightened on its own and he tried to look as unaffected as he possibly could when he was getting so many stares. It felt like everyone was trying to surreptitiously peek at him all through Aizawa's morning assembly. At the end of his short speech about what to expect that day and a few school rules, he finally said, and to assuage all of your obvious curiosity, no one was expelled yesterday as you can clearly see. His voice was irritated and Izuku bit the inside of his cheek, meeting the man's gaze boldly. That being said, I would like you to see me after class today, Midoriya. You can find me in the teacher's offices, just ask another student if you can't find it on your map. Izuku wanted to die a little. Yes, sir. He said respectfully and Aizawa nodded and promptly rolled himself back into that hideous yellow sleeping bag that Izuku thought looked like a worm. Izuku relaxed ever so slightly and turned a mournful expression to Uraraka, who stifled a giggle into her fist and sent him back an especially sympathetic look. They were all distracted by the arrival of Present Mike, who arrived in full hero gear and with a loud and enigmatic, "What's up, listeners?" Izuku smiled at the familiar address. He'd been a long-time listener of Present Mix radio station and he volunteered at the man's food bank every weekend. He'd seen the hero there a few times out of his hero gear and had recognized him after only 2 weeks just by the man's inability to contain his personality. It was one of the things Izuku found most charming about the voice hero, noting in his notebook at the time that the hero's hero persona seemed to be exactly the same as who he was as a person. Aizawa stood up, folding his sleeping bag over his arm and pausing briefly to say something to present Mike before leaving without looking back. A bit of the tenseness eked out of Izuku's spine once he was gone. "I hope you're all ready for some English," he said in English, and Izuku understood him fairly well. He'd been studying English since he was younger than 5 because of All Might's numerous English content. He knew for a fact that Bakugo was just as good at English, and for sure, his old friend looked pretty at ease in the class whereas several other students looked abruptly horrified. Kaminari, he could do something with electricity according to Uraraka, and Izuku was extremely eager to see that in person, looked like he was about to throw up when he received his worksheet. Is anyone fluent in another language? It doesn't have to be English. Present Mike engaged them with a wide grin. Some students lifted their hands, including Izuku. Right on. What languages? Seulement la langue la plus romantique du monde, monsieur. Aoyama said, a flamboyant smile etched on his face, as he raised his hand and scattered what seemed to be confetti around him. Izuku was impressed by the dedication to the bit, as the boy promptly knelt down to scoop it all up while Present Mike laughed. I speak a variety of languages, Yayorozu Momo said confidently. She was tall and extremely pretty, with long black hair gathered in a ponytail. Mandarin, English, and conversational Spanish. Ooh, a budding polyglot. Present Mike sounded excited, then turned to Izuku. What about you? You? He peeked at a list on his table. Midoriya? Midoriya? Hey, I know you. Izuku pinkened at all the eyes suddenly on him again. I speak Japanese and fluent English, sensei, and I'm conversational in Mandarin too, but I'm hardly fluent at all. Izuku answered the first question and then, embarrassedly, I know you too, Present Mike sensei, I've met you out of your hero costume over the weekends. Present Mike blinked and then seemed to realize. Oh, that's right, I remember where I've seen you now, little listener. He beamed. Awesome. Wait, where have you seen each other before? A boy named Siro, that was the one with tape elbows, asked curiously, and he wasn't the only curious one. Can I tell them Midoriya? Or would you prefer to keep that private? Present Mike asked, and Izuku shyly gave his permission, so the hero said, Midoriya here volunteers at my food bank every weekend. My radio show hosts a food bank in a couple prefectures and Midoriya volunteers here at the Muzutafu one, so I've met him a couple times. So heroic. Hagakure squealed, I can't believe Aizawa-sensei almost got rid of you, Midoriya. You're a gem. Izuku choked on his own spit at that, and Present Mike gave an awkward-sounding laugh, hurriedly moving on with the class and bidding them all to call him Yamada-sensei. For the most part, school followed a standard protocol and Izuku tried to enjoy getting to know his classmates throughout the day. At lunch he sat with Uraraka, Kirishima, Ida, and Ishido, and they all expressed their concern for his meeting with Aizawa later in the day. Well, most of them did. Izuku chose to politely ignore Ida's advice of just apologizing to Aizawa to make things right. He had nothing to apologize for. He knew that, though the thought didn't make him feel especially better. At the end of their last PRD, most students made their way home except for the school's hero students who would be staying for their first class of foundational heroics. There was a palpable excitement in the air as they waited for the teacher to arrive, and even Izuku, who had known his mentor for almost a year now, couldn't contain his excitement as the door burst open with a flurry of dramatic smoke and a shout of, I am here!